You're making me doubt my teacher? Lupin never expected to hear that name from Harry's lips. Severus Snape, as the boy's teacher? The idea sounded absurd. Lupin knew only that after Voldemort's fall, Snape had won Dumbledore's trust and taken a position at Hogwarts. He didn't know exactly what part Snape had played in James and Lily's deaths, but he knew enough. Snape had hated James with a fierce, personal hatred. It was unfathomable that he could be kind to James's son, unless there was some ulterior motive. Lupin lowered his head and looked at Harry seriously. I don't understand why Dumbledore would let Snape find you, Harry. That man and your father loathed each other, practically mortal enemies. Think, Lupin said. Is Snape truly treating you as a student, or does he have another reason? How did you end up here? How did you get into this danger? Harry's face went cold. He shook Lupin's hand off his arm and snapped. I know what my teacher did in the past, and I know there was hatred between him and my parents, but you can't make me doubt that he wants to harm me. Lupin was stunned. He blinked at the boy, irrationally wondering if Snape had put some spell on him. Otherwise, how could James and Lily's son defend Snape? Gathering himself, Lupin tried to keep his voice steady and earnest. Harry, I won't pretend I'm impartial about those days. We were close to James, but I can tell you this. Severus Snape is not a straightforwardly good man. He has his talents, yes, but he followed someone he shouldn't have, the man who killed your parents. Enough. Harry cut him off fiercely. Do you think teacher hid that from me? He told me everything from the beginning. Lupin's eyes widened. He was shaken both by Harry's defense of Snape and by what the boy claimed. Harry stared him in the eye. People change. I know you judge teacher by the past, but he isn't what you say he is. Ever since he took me out of Aunt Petunia's, he's told me the truth. He told me he was my enemy and that he couldn't absolve himself for my parents' deaths, but he still offered to teach me everything he knew. He said that once I become a true wizard, I could have my revenge, fair and square. He saved an innocent vampire and a crippled girl for me, taught me the basics of the magical world, and told me that love can change a person. I believe him. I believe everything he told me. Lupin felt the blood drain from his face. The story sounded like a fairy tale. This was Snape? When at last he found his voice, he pressed on, unwilling to let the matter rest. Then why did he take you as a student? Did he mean to train his own enemy to kill him? Why would he do that? Harry hesitated, then whispered, He said he was sorry for my mother. Lupin had no words. If anything could make him imagine Snape had changed, it was that confession. But if Lily's death had turned him around, why wait so long to take Harry in? Was Dumbledore aware? The questions tangled in Lupin's mind. Still, reasoning about Snape could wait. The immediate concern was escape. Now that he knew the boy in front of him was truly Harry, Lupin's only thought was to protect him and get them out whole. Not now, he said. Whether that's true or not, we'll find out after we get away. A sudden commotion outside the cave cut him off. Greyback's pack had returned, disordered and blood-stained, 2 of them dripping with gore, and 3 fewer than before. Greyback's face was a pot-black scowl as he raged. Shameless traitor, despicable coward, worse than the craftiest goblin. The Dark Lord will punish him. He will be punished. He barked orders, dragging the captured children and Lupin forward and producing portkeys. He intended to flee. Lupin didn't know what had happened, but he sensed an opportunity. He had no wand. Wandless magic could only leave fleeting traces in haste. Under the watch of more than a dozen snarling werewolves, he was forced to touch a portkey along with 3 of the creatures and the children, and in an instant they were gone. Greyback watched them go, then led the others to use different portkeys to relocate. Not long after they left, an invisible blade split the giant boulder, sealing the cave entrance. The rock burst apart with a thunderous crash, raising a choking cloud of dust. When it cleared, 3 blood-smeared figures stepped out of the debris and into the abandoned Seacliff cave. 82. Call me Uncle Snape. After hiring an owl in Eastbourne, he sent a letter to Kingsley. Without pausing, Severus took Lyle Lupin and Robert Granger straight to the Seacliff, Beachy Head. The place had been cordoned off by Muggle police. Tourists were kept back, and inside the barricade, a squad of Aurors controlled the scene. Among them were several wizards from the Memory Obliviation Squad, rounding up muggles who'd seen the previous night's events and erasing their memories. Severus, Lyle, and Robert did not announce themselves. Many of the Aurors were people who had been at the fight the night before. The team deployed then were clearly men of Robards. Besides, although Severus had not yet worked out how someone had shaken off the Imperious curse, the fact that whoever it was had tipped off the werewolves once or twice suggested they could do it again. It would be foolish to draw the attention of the whole Auror office now. They would have to wait until Kingsley had received Severus's letter and begun to sort things inside the ministry before asking for help. They avoided the Aurors on the cliff and began to search the shoreline. Lyle led the way. If the old werewolf had left any mark, he was their best hope. In the end, it was Severus who found the clue. He pointed down to an unobtrusive rock at the base of the cliff, washed by spray. Faintly carved into its face, like a child's doodle, was a smiling man in the moon, roughly the height of a man. Leal and Robert peered and saw it. Even Lyle looked puzzled at the crude carving. "Remus left that," Severus said with certainty. "How do you know?" Lyle asked. Severus shrugged. At school he had 3 best friends. The 4 of them were inseparable, called themselves the Marauders, and each took a nickname. Remus's was Mooney. Robert looked at Severus, curious. "Were you one of them?" Severus let out a short, dry laugh. "If their ringleader and that mutt heard you say that, Robert, they'd hate you for life." "You mean I said something wrong?" Robert rubbed his chin, quick as ever to pick up the hint. "You were enemies?" "On a full moon, when Remus went out of the grounds to transform, they tried to lure me to him so he'd—" Severus cut the explanation off with a casual, flat tone. "Their leader pulled me back before it went too far. I'd followed them partly of my own doing, but it was mostly that black dog's fault. Remus was innocent. He knew nothing about what they were planning." Lyle stared. Robert's eyes widened. Severus took the moment to steer them back to the task at hand. "Come on. If Remus is using this sign, he's running out of options. Hardly anyone ever knew the name Mooney. He's clutching at straws." Lyle exchanged a look with Robert, then sighed. "Even if Remus didn't intend this, I must apologize for my son." Severus patted his shoulder. "It's all right, Lyle. We're friends. Why would I hold a grudge? Once we get Remus back, have him thank Uncle Snape himself. Then we can forget the whole thing. Agreed?" Lyle pointed at him, shaking his head with a helpless little laugh. They did not linger on the cliff. They found a path down to the beach and searched until, around 10 in the morning, they relocated the Moonface rock. Opposite it, a narrow, winding track half hidden by boulders led inland. As they found the path, 5 gray-robed, mostly bearded wizards stepped out from it. The sudden encounter froze both groups for a heartbeat. Severus was first to move. He slammed a shield charm over Robert without hesitation. The tip of his wand flared scarlet. "Leal, take them alive. Robert, ignore them. Feed them lead. Killing these beasts isn't a crime," he barked. 2 spells followed in quick succession. "Petrificus totalis," Lyle shouted, and someone behind him cried, "Expelliarmus!" The werewolf wizards were a fraction of a second slower to react, but as Severus shouted, they snapped out of whatever daze they'd been in. They were not a disorganized mob. Instead of fleeing, they drew their wands to fight. A red beam lanced from Severus's wand. The foremost werewolf went down. Lyle's disarming curse hit another. Some of the attackers tumbled aside, but one turned toward Robert, the only one with no wand, clutching a thick, long thing in both hands, evidently thinking him the easy target. Robert was the only muggle present, and by far the deadliest. His face went as cold as iron as the werewolf charged. He leveled the barrel, clicked off the safety, aimed at the creature's chest, put his finger on the trigger and pulled. Bang! 83. Update notification. Going live at midnight tonight with 8 chapters. The first half, 4 chapters, drops at midnight. The remaining 4 will be released tomorrow at 6 p.m. After launch, expect 3 to 5 chapters daily. I may merge shorter ones, for example, 2 2K word chapters into 1 4K, and any schedule tweaks will be announced in the author's note after tomorrow's 8 chapters go up. Bonus chapters for tips? We'll talk when someone hits the patron tier. Business done. Below is just chatter. Skip if you're only here for tonight's update. Honestly, I never imagined my alt account novel, The Benevolent Villain, would end the way it did. Even the day before surgery, lying in the hospital, I had my dad bring my keyboard so the story wouldn't miss an update. I loved the concept. After finishing, they call me a saint. Even though it's clearly the fourth calamity, I spent ages pitching drafts to chief editor Dragonfly Captain, cyber sci-fi, cultivation, everything. He shot them all down and simply asked, "What do you actually want to write?" Most authors chase whatever trope is hot. That question left me blank, because web novel content always boils down to what the protagonist wants. When I set a goal for my MC, I ask myself, if I were in that world, what would I do? Sounds lofty, maybe naive, but fiction is where we do what reality won't let us, right? What do I ache to try but never dare? So I told Dragonfly Captain straight, I want to write anti-oppression revolution, something with a dash of red. It's a minefield in web fiction. Yet he's a great editor. He suggested, set it in a fictional republic era. No backdrop is riskier or more perfect. I tossed all night, brainwaves crashing with ideas. Within a week, I fired off an opening I was proud of. His reply was the highest praise I've ever had. That's the flavor. I launched under the pen name Crow at the Bow on February 5th. Chapter 1 got flagged instantly. I rewrote overnight, my editor Ginger T guiding me, and finally pushed it live. I knew writing that book well was my duty, to readers and to the editors who believed in me. Even when it nearly got nuked, I rewrote every risky line without betraying the spirit, practically kneeling to the censors. When it went live, it barely scraped 1,000 subs, yet I stayed upbeat. Both Hogwarts Without a Savior and the original Saint novel opened around 1,000 or less, yet the former hit 10K subs a year after ending. The latter, starting from 0 ads, sits above 7K high-quality subs. So I believed I'd keep improving and deliver the tale in its best form. The day after launch, I was rushed to the hospital. 3 days of tests, 4 hours of sleep, pain screaming. Doctors suspected gallbladder issues, but ultrasounds showed nothing. As my mom cried and prepared to take me to Shanghai, the final MRI pinned it. Gallstones blocking the duct, triggering cholecystitis. Too late. My gallbladder was necrotic, pus spreading to my liver and lungs. Pneumonia set in, liver enzymes shot up. That book I'd pinned my hopes on, dead in the water. Delay it any longer, and I'd be in ICU. Save life first, stories later. Post-op, 10 days in, all I could think about was how to reboot the benevolent villain. Near death skews your head. I felt impatient, guilty toward readers and editors, desperate to match that opening. The harder I tried, the worse it got. Even I couldn't stomach the drafts. After 2 blank days, I realized, stop chasing some new miracle and just calm down. Hence, the sunshiny Severus Snape of Hogwarts. Laugh if you want. I wrote that opening ages ago, around July 2024. While my alt-account Saint novel hit 100K words, the new book's dismal stats rattled me daily. I kept thinking of crawling back to fanfic. To blow off steam, I drafted 3 chapters of this goofy idea, chuckled for 2 days, then shelved it. The Saint story had me hooked anyway. Last month, I resolved to reset my mindset and sent last year's opener to my editor. She loved the tale and the writing, only feared my mood had shifted and I'd wreck it later. So I kept writing past chapter 3, all the way to Harry being taken away, and resubmitted. Once she approved, I launched. I love every story I've written, truly, from the heart. The book that put me on the map was the dark, oppressive No Savior, yet my debut and second novel, Defense Professor, were light and fun. Now seasoned, I'm ready to nail this one. The first vampire arc proved it, so tidy that readers binged, then went quiet, nuking my recent read count. But as always, I'll get better. No one will be disappointed. Rest assured, after launch, I'll update like mad. I love reading, and I love writing even more. I'll keep leveling up and give you even greater tales ahead. July 15th, 2025. Captain of the Sea. The instant a blinding flash erupted from the barrel of the gun Hermione's father held, the werewolf charging him was hurled backward as if yanked by an invisible rope, like a broken kite tumbling through the air. The thunderous report turned every head. The 3 remaining werewolves watched their comrade hit the ground, his chest a ruin, blood spurting from his mouth, beyond saving. Even old Lupin froze. His wife was a muggle. He knew exactly how lethal a gun could be to ordinary folk, but he had never seen one fired at such close range. Hermione's father had used a double-barreled shotgun. The spray of shot at point-blank range would rip apart any untrained werewolf. Most of them couldn't cast a shield charm, and Lupin could not imagine what charm could stand up to that brute force. The pack howled as the crimson spray splattered them. The single blast had drained their will to fight. The remaining three spun and fled. Granger's face was pale and cold, though the breath had left him ragged. A law-abiding dentist, he had never imagined he'd fire at a human. He had only ever used his gun for hunting. But with his daughter taken, and knowing what wizarding power could do, he had thrown away every scrap of restraint. Time spent with Severus and old Lupin had taught him enough to understand how dangerous the beasts were. His wife's tears when they parted, the terror of a missing child, everything in him snapped. Without hesitation, he broke open the shotgun, ejected the spent shells, drew 2 fresh cartridges from the pouch at his waist, and thumbed them home. By then, Severus and old Lupin were already sprinting after the fleeing werewolves. Granger followed. They tore along the narrow track and burst into the camp the pack had made on the beach. At the noise, Greyback led his followers to confront the 3 intruders. The instant Fenrir Greyback set eyes on Snape, his gaze fixed. "Severus Snape," he snarled. Greyback knew that silhouette all too well. 10 years ago, when Lord Voldemort had held the wizarding world in terror, Snape had been the Dark Lord's favorite, and Greyback, only a hired thug, had had to look up to him. Greyback had followed recent events closely. After the trial, he and Lucius had agreed the fanatic Death Eater who had served Voldemort to the end could not have truly changed. Merlin would laugh at the idea of repentance. So Greyback assumed Severus was simply acting to escape punishment, until today, seeing the man here in the flesh, storming his lair with blades flashing as if he'd never been an ally. It left Greyback apoplectic. "Traitor! What would you know?" Greyback screamed. "The Dark Lord will punish you. He'll make you beg for death." Severus's reply was a flick of his wand. Sectum Sempra. The dark curse he had invented, an invisible blade keener than steel, cut through the air. Greyback's blood ran cold. He hunched like the wolf he had become and sprang aside. He dodged, but the werewolf beside him was not so lucky. A shriek split the air as the man's arm was torn free, the shoulder sheared clean as if with butter. Old Lupin and Granger moved without hesitation, wand and shotgun rising together. Greyback glared with the hunger of a beast, spitting insults, even as he barked orders. "Wait for me, you treacherous cur! Release the kittens! Run, run!" Before he finished, the pack was already scrambling to withdraw. From the shadows beneath the cliff, small black heads popped out one after another. Pairs of feral eyes gleamed, 8 or 9 coal-black kittens. Some enchantment had masked and bound them. Freed by their captor's retreat, the cats fixed on Severus's group with sudden, furious intent. "Robert, fall back between Lyle and me. There are too many. You're exposed!" Severus shouted, closing protectively around Granger with old Lupin at his other side. "Madagots!" Lupin cried. "Werewolves could never tame such creatures. They must have stolen them." No longer harmless, the kittens ballooned in size. Fangs and claws lengthened. They leapt as one, like a hunting cheetah pack, hurling themselves at the 3 men. Severus swept his wand in a wide arc. Glacius! A broad wave of frost slammed into 5 of the Madagots, freezing them mid-pounce, but several slipped through and launched themselves at him. Bombarda Maxima! A blast like the detonation of 20 kilos of TNT tore the air at Severus's side. Sand and pebbles exploded upward. A cloud of dust and smoke washed over the beach, throwing bodies and beasts off their feet. Several of the attacking cats were thrown back, howling and skidding across the sand, while others were momentarily dazed. The smoke choked the scene and turned the world into a roiling gray blur. Seizing the brief, disorderly pause, Severus, Lupin, and Granger pushed forward through the spray of grit and the whining of injured Madagots, racing toward the tents and the spot where Hermione must have been taken. After the blasting curse finished off the last of the Madagots, Lupin threw himself in front of Hermione and drove the remaining 2 attackers back. The 3 of them didn't pause. Severus knew those cats were only Greyback's delaying tactic. Harry, Hermione, and the other kidnapped children had to be hidden nearby. They followed the direction the werewolves had gone, and after a short chase, found a man-hewn stone stairway carved into the sea cliff. They climbed it and, within minutes, came to a cave mouth blocked by a huge boulder. "Stand back!" Severus pressed his wand tip against the rock. Sectum sempra. There was a single thunderous boom, and the 7-meter boulder split to dust. As rubble and dust billowed down, Severus hurried them inside. They had still been delayed, however. The cave was deserted. Only abandoned tents and scattered daily necessities remained. Lupin slammed his fist against the rock wall. They ran fast. Severus moved deeper into the cave and found no traces of apparition. They prepared in advance. They didn't apparate away. They must have used something like a portkey. "Can we track where it went?" Hermione asked, frowning. "We can, but not by ourselves. We'll need ministry specialists." Severus straightened and, peering further into the cave, noticed something odd behind a jumble of tents. A palm-sized stone sheep left behind by a hurried Transfiguration. Most of it still looked like rough rock, its form only vaguely ovine, the kind of work that would fail a Hogwarts Transfiguration class and earn Professor McGonagall a deduction of points. But the sheep's head clearly bore 4 horns. "What does it mean?" Severus asked, picking up the botched figure. Even he couldn't tell whether it was a deliberate clue Lupin had left or something else. Hermione stared at the 4 horns, then said slowly, "When I was 7, I went on holiday to the Isle of Man. The island's known for 2 unusual animals, tailless cats and 4-horned sheep." Severus and Lupin exchanged a look. "Remus lived on that island for a month as a child. His mother took him," Lupin added. "That's almost certainly it," Severus said. If Lupin's wand was confiscated, he couldn't use any advanced magic. He had to leave a hurried hint. "Shall we go at once?" Lupin asked. "You and Robert should first question the werewolf I caught outside and bound with Petrificus totalis. See what you can get from him. Then head to the island. Lupin's been there and knows it better than any of us," Severus said thoughtfully. "I need to find Kingsley first. He's received my letter. Before the Aurors can act, we need to get this sorted above their heads." Lupin and Hermione raised no objections. Severus always coordinated their moves. "How long before you join us?" Hermione asked. "Tomorrow at the latest." With that, Severus apparated away. Ministry of Magic, Auror Office. Kingsley Shacklebolt received Severus's letter before noon. Halfway through reading it, his hands began to shake. The matter was enormous. When he finished, he burned the letter, then strode to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement's archives. "I need to review a prisoner file from Azkaban," he told the board wizard on duty. "Whose?" the man asked, barely looking up. "An inmate who died on the island. Under the rules, I don't need to give the name." "Very well, Mr. Shacklebolt. Fill in this form, then go to the 3rd room, 2nd row. Those shelves hold records of prisoners who died in Azkaban." Kingsley filled out the form quickly, went to the room, and found the shelf. A brief search produced the file he wanted. Barty Crouch Jr., imprisoned November 1982, died March 1984. As he flipped through, one line leapt out at him. "After death, buried in Azkaban Island's southeast cemetery." He snapped the file shut, replaced it, and walked out with controlled composure, though his breath came faster than usual. The guard at the door, still sipping tea and reading, noticed nothing. Kingsley didn't return to the Auror office. He needed advice. There was only one man whose counsel he trusted in a matter like this, the letter's author. He headed for the Ministry Owlery to borrow an owl, but an Auror intercepted him. "Shacklebolt, someone's here to see you." "Who?" "Professor Snape." "Well, Mr. Snape now," the Auror said with a smirk. "He's quite popular these days. Half the ministry stopped to greet him. Last time he was here, they all ducked." Kingsley cut him off and hurried away. The Auror muttered, "Even Lockhart can't match his fame these days." By lift, Kingsley was back in the Auror office in under 5 minutes, panting. He opened the door to find Severus seated at his desk, sampling pastries from a rookie Auror. Severus looked up, smiled, and waved as Kingsley stepped in. 86, Azkaban's Tomb, 3rd update. Please subscribe. "I was just about to write to you." Kingsley, his expression grave, led Severus into a small lounge. Severus still held the pastries the little girl had given him, speaking between bites. "I thought you'd be interested. Have you looked into anything?" Kingsley drew a deep breath. "I pulled the file from records. He's listed as having died in an Azkaban cell in March 1984, then buried in the island's graveyard." "Then it's simple to verify," Severus said, holding his gaze. "Open the grave and we'll know if he's truly dead." If someone on Polyjuice dies, the corpse keeps the borrowed shape, but no disguise lasts forever. Once the flesh decays to bone, the body reverts. So what are we waiting for? Do we report this up the chain? There's only the Minister for Magic above a department head. By the time you book with Bagnold, those werewolves will have moved on. Severus shrugged. If you take my advice, tell no one, just the two of us. File the application under your name. We sail to Azkaban tonight. Get the proof, then raid his house. Just the two of us? Kingsley sounded uncertain. Trust me, until we have him, the fewer who know the better. He's run the department for 10 years. Half the ministry could be his eyes. One extra ear is one more risk. Severus tapped the table. Besides, the two of us are enough. Kingsley, unused to doubting Severus, only measured whether the plan could work. After a second, he stood. I'll get us clearance to the island. Severus, unsurprised, lifted his teacup in salute. Make it quick. Azkaban after dark is no place for the living. Kingsley moved fast, but the ministry is the ministry. Clearance arrived at 4 in the afternoon. They stepped into the department's flow and emerged at a ministry outpost on the North Sea coast, the lone pier that served Azkaban. Kingsley handed over their permit. The caretaker assigned them a skiff with an orange lantern at the prow. You can't apparate near Azkaban. There's no flue, and the sea's cloaked in fog. Only ministry boats get through. He leapt aboard. Severus followed. When they were seated, the skiff moved of its own accord, racing north. For 2 hours they sped onward until the gray-white mist swallowed the sea. Within the lantern's glow, their vision stayed clear, and the boat held its course. Half an hour later, land appeared, a bleak gray island strewn with stone and almost no plant life. As the skiff nosed in, they made out, through the haze, the castle at the island's heart. Time had left it ruinous. Black lichen clung to cracked walls, writhing in the wind like withered arms groping between despair and pain. Scores of tall, black-shrouded figures drifted around the battlements. The prison's warders. Dementors. Kingsley lifted the lantern. Stay close. They're not always obedient. Aurors have been attacked before. Severus nodded. They skirted the shore, avoiding the castle, and rounded the island's southeast corner. There lay a vast graveyard. A rickety fence ringed it. At the gate stood a rotted wooden arch, crooked with age. Severus looked up at the crumbling lintel and read letters carved long ago. May the Lord forgive, 10 July 1730. Since Azkaban became a prison, Kingsley said quietly, everyone who dies here is buried in this ground. Eldritch Diggory, the 4th Minister for Magic, was the first to set foot on the island, Severus said, stepping beneath the arch. Seeing this cemetery, he tried to end its use and remove the Dementors. Found it inhumane? Kingsley asked. More than that, lock the worst criminals here. Let hope-sucking monsters feed on them daily, and only madmen come out. They split up to search the sprawling yard. Night was closing in, the fog thick enough to blind, when Kingsley called out, Here! Severus hurried over. A headstone read, Barty Crouch, 1962 to 1984. A sneer touched Severus's mouth. I barely knew him, but among the Death Eaters he was one of the few who never sneered at my blood. Will that make digging him up harder? Kingsley's voice trembled. Harder? Severus gave a short laugh and raised his wand. Reducto! The grave exploded open with a thunderous boom. A rotted coffin burst apart and a white skeleton tumbled out. Kingsley held his breath, flicked his wand a few times, and brushed the soil away until the bones were fully exposed. As an Auror, he went straight to the pelvis. There was no point looking anywhere else. That was the clearest way to tell whether the corpse had been male or female. One look at the pelvic bones made his knees go weak. He staggered backward, nearly falling. He had come already prepared to believe Severus, but seeing it with his own eyes still rocked him. It was true. The Death Eater who was supposed to have died in Azkaban, Barty Crouch Jr., had in fact been impersonated by a woman. Worse, the escape had only been possible because Crouch Sr., a senior ministry official, had abused his power to help. In the history of the ministry, no prisoner had ever escaped Azkaban. For more than 2 centuries, the prison had been treated as inescapable. The wizarding world believed its worst offenders safely locked away. Now the fortress had been breached, and Barty Crouch Jr. was the first confirmed escapee. The scandal it would cause was unimaginable. Severus watched him without surprise. Bringing Kingsley to Azkaban had simply been a matter of tidying up the evidence for what came next. Kingsley's face went ashen. He gripped his wand until his knuckles whitened. "He's disgraced everything he once stood for," he said hoarsely. "If he couldn't bear to lose his son, why hand down that sentence in the first place? As a judge, he could have forced himself to be impartial, but as a husband, he couldn't refuse a dying wife. He betrayed the law." Severus replied quietly, "People are complicated. Loyalties pull at them from different directions. Some have to make impossible choices." Kingsley drew several deep breaths until he recovered his composure. He turned to Severus, resolve hardening his features. "So do we go now and expose what they've done?" "Whenever you're ready," Severus said. "Although, if you don't mind being pilloried later for arresting your superior's superior without authorization, we can leave at once." "I've never cared about that," Kingsley said. He lifted the lantern, and they set off the way they had come. The Isle of Man, sits in the North Channel between England and Ireland. At its northern tip, on the shore that faces the channel, there is a place no Muggle had set foot in for more than 20 years. Once a private estate, the spot vanished from Muggle maps back in the 70s and became, by common consent in the magical world, a secret stronghold for a single organization. Greyback had brought the werewolves there by portkey. They tumbled out, panting and frantic. He was incandescent with rage, his mind fixed on Severus. He forgot for a moment that the traitor had arrived with someone Greyback himself knew. "Damn him," he snarled. "The Dark Lord will not let him live. That filthy traitor." The other werewolves were shaken too. One lay on the ground howling, his arms severed by a curse. Earlier, Remus had been brought in and placed under the guard of 3 werewolves. Now he stood in front of the children, watching Greyback in silence. Harry was behind him, tense, then ducked back when he caught himself. "Who did you run into?" Remus asked quietly. "Severus Snape," Greyback roared. The name made Remus flinch despite himself. Greyback panted, face twisted, then let out a cold, bitter laugh. "I thought all he said at the ministry hearing was lies. Turns out he's become the Auror's lapdog. But he doesn't know the Dark Lord's plans. He thinks he can sleep easy now? Dream on." "Pierre, stay here with 4 others," Greyback ordered. "The rest of you come with me." Remus started to ask where they were going, but Greyback turned and fixed him with a hard stare as if reading his thoughts. "Doesn't it seem convenient?" Greyback said. "How did Snape find our seaside hideout?" Every muscle in Remus tightened. Sweat had soaked his back, and he felt boxed in, but he kept his face calm. Greyback's gaze flicked over him with sharp suspicion. "You're not like the others," he said. "You don't even have a wand. Who knows what you can do without one? Consider this your final warning. If Aurors or Snape track us here, no matter whose fault it is, you'll be the one to suffer. Move, and keep your wands close." With that, Greyback vanished from sight, apparating away with the rest. The werewolves left behind turned to eye Remus with thinly veiled malice. Remus ignored them. He wrapped an extra blanket around the feverish boy beside him, Jimmy, and tried to keep his voice light for the children's sake. "Looks like our roast beef lunch is off the menu," he said, forcing a small smile. "Look, this is my father! Look, this is my father!" The Crouch House had, for reasons Barty Crouch could no longer explain, come to resemble a limestone cave by the lake, cold, gloomy, and bone-deep in chill. Only the night wind, stirring the birches at the edge of the drive, ever dragged his weary frame home from the ministry. In truth, he scarcely crossed its threshold anymore. Ever since that deed 5 years ago, he loathed returning. He dreaded the person who waited inside. He loosened the clasps of his traveling cloak, leaned against the gatepost, drew a cigarette from his pocket, and, once it was lit, stared vacantly at the ancestral house, now a cage. When had home become this? Barty cast his mind back to the winter of 1982, when he had discovered with horror that the son he had once prized was a Death Eater. To the winter of 1984, when St. Mungo's had pronounced his wife beyond help and she had been left to die at home, or to that spring when he had dragged that monster from Azkaban, only to find that even a mother's death and a father's ruined name could not turn him back, and he had been forced to keep him shackled under the imperious curse? 5 years can be a short time for a wizard, but for Barty, it had been an agony that erased every happier memory. Since the affair with Severus Snape, he had been returning later and later. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement had work enough for its director, though he knew perfectly well he was little more than a plasterer, patching over the magical world's leaks, playing politics as a mediator, using the last scraps of his reputation to shield the minister. The recent months had drained him further. He stubbed the cigarette out, counting that it had been 2 weeks since he last placed his son under Imperius. He remembered the case that had tangled him, an apparent potion poisoning before the Slytherin dean at Hogwarts had involved himself. He had seen the wretch on the floor, writhing and sobbing for his mother, while Winky kowtowed and pleaded that she could take no more. Barty had meant to grant the prisoner a week's respite. Winky could watch him. But Snape's meddling had thrown the entire department into turmoil, and Barty had lost track of time. Once or twice he had managed to renew the curse, only to find the boy sleeping. The days had slipped by. Recently, he had begun to suspect that his son was the source of the Auror's leaks. His study contained memos from Scrimgeour, orders and intelligence from which one could map every forthcoming raid. Today, he could delay no longer. Gathering his cloak, Barty stepped inside. From the moment he crossed the threshold, something felt wrong. He halted, drew his wand from his sleeve, and stared at the wide-open window. Night wind surged through, flinging the curtains. "Winky," he called. But the house elf, who had always answered at once, did not appear. The house lay in an oppressive silence, as though no living soul remained. A cold foreboding tightened his chest. Wand raised, muscles taut, he cast a shield charm and moved cautiously toward the inner rooms. The parlor was black. The usually dutiful elf was gone. The place looked ransacked, as if by bandits. As Barty climbed the stairs, a sudden gust toppled the corner coat stand with a clatter. He spun, shouting into the dark, "Who's there? Show yourself!" Silence answered. He was about to lower his wand when the study door at the top of the landing burst open. A volley of scarlet curses flashed out before he could react. One shattered his shield charm on impact. The rest slammed into him. The force hurled him across the hall, crashing him against the wall. He crumpled to the carpet, every muscle locked. His wand, snatched from him by a well-aimed Expelliarmus, vanished into the gloom. Even so, his eyes would not leave the figures in the study. In the lamplight, a pale young man lounged in an expensive high-backed chair, legs crossed. His hair was wild, his shirt white and his braces black. He twirled a wand between his fingers, as if it were a toy. He looked hardly 20. Around him formed a ring of rogues: Fenrir Greyback, Thorfinn Roll, Bruno Selwyn, Dino Perkins, werewolves, fugitives, men whose names were dusted with blood. Every one of them circled the captive, his son. "Look, look, gentlemen," the young man called, voice bright with triumph. "Here stands my father, the man who placed his own son under the imperious curse, the corrupt official, the hypocrite, the worm." The villains roared, eyes bloodshot with hunger fixed on the boy who bore his name, the pride of Barty's life. And yet Barty felt no plea in that gaze, no sorrow. There was only a quiet pity he could not coax into words. The young man smiled as he raised his wand. "So," he said softly, "how shall I repay 5 years of his loving care? When did I betray the Dark Lord?" His words and actions terrified the assembled villains. The dark wizards, many far older and more experienced than this young man, exchanged uneasy glances. They had assumed he would at most humiliate the department head of the Ministry of Magic. After all, the man was his biological father and had rescued him from prison. They had guessed wrong. They had underestimated the madness and ruthlessness of this supposed loyal follower of the Dark Lord. Crucio, the unforgivable curse which strikes at the soul, sprang from the young man's wand as easily as breathing. Old Barty writhed on the floor, every bone in his body seeming to burn. "In these past 5 years, do you remember how many times you used the Imperius on me, father?" The young man laughed, joyful, unrestrained. "I remember. Every single time you cast it is carved into my heart. I've been waiting for this day. I've been waiting all along. I'm going to repay you, every last bit of it." Crucio! Ah! The pain was such that Barty's prior enchantments broke. He screamed and rolled on the floor, twisting as if plunged into a boiling cauldron. "Do you know how long I've anticipated this, ever since you used Mother to swap me out? Do you know how much suffering your ignorance and stubbornness have caused me?" You were the one who taught me from a young age to live up to the glory of the Crouch family, to be proud of our blood. I did exactly as you said. I followed the master. I supported pure blood rule. I hated half-breeds and mudbloods. And yet you tell me I was wrong. Do you know the despair I felt when I begged you in the courtroom, and you didn't even see me as your son? You understand nothing. You didn't care about Mother, and you didn't care about me. You only cared about yourself. Crucio! Old Barty stopped struggling. His body convulsed, saliva drooled from his mouth, and his eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Apart from the rise and fall of his chest, he looked dead, unable to make a sound. Another Cruciatus curse left the room in a heavy silence. These dark wizards had seen the curse before. It was not rare among their kind, but even they felt uneasy watching someone unleash it on his own flesh and blood. "It's time to put you out of your misery," the young man said, laughing breathlessly. He raised his wand again and spoke the spell that had no counter, the one that so easily took a life. Avada Kedavra! A green light flared at the tip of his wand, but before the killing curse could fire, old Barty, still on the floor, was seized by some unknown magic. He floated up and slid across the room. The killing curse struck only the floor, leaving a scorched black mark. "Who's there?" The young man spun toward the stairs. The villains drew their wands. A slender figure climbed slowly from the stairwell. As he mounted each step, the extinguished lights around the house blinked back to life. When the light fell on him, everyone knew who it was. "Long time no see, Barty Crouch. I thought you died in Azkaban long ago." "Severus Snape!" Greyback, who had clashed with Severus earlier that afternoon and been chased by Sectum Sempra, shouted in shock. Seeing this traitor at the Crouch house that evening left him visibly shaken. Barty Jr.'s manic smile faded, his gaze turned cold and calculating. "So it's Senior Snape. It has been a long time. I've heard you've made quite a name for yourself in the magical world recently." Severus took the final step, leaned against the banister, raised an eyebrow, and replied evenly. "Not as much as you, Junior. You caused quite a stir the moment you escaped Azkaban, the first criminal to get out, and now a man trying to murder his father. If that reputation spreads, the whole magical world will be talking about you." He tilted his head toward Greyback, who snarled with wolfish ferocity. "But how did you end up associating with such scum? He can't even be trusted with a wand. He's nothing more than a carrion-eating beast. Do you really need to invoke the Dark Lord's name to get someone like him to do your dirty work?" Greyback growled, arching his back and baring claws as if ready to lunge. Barty Jr. waved a hand and the werewolf calmed. Then he fixed Severus with a look that placed him above the mere rabble, an equal, perhaps, or at least someone worth watching closely. "I think the Dark Lord might forgive your temporary siding with Dumbledore, but he cannot forgive true betrayal." His voice was icy. Barty Jr. had never fully believed everything told to him during the trial. He wanted Severus to say plainly where his loyalties lay. Ghost Snape, seated somewhere inside Severus, perked up as well. Even he was curious how Severus would present his identity to the Death Eaters. Both Dumbledore and the Ghost had long believed the Dark Lord would return, and Severus had been among the first to predict that. Now Severus was causing a sensation in the magical world, publicly claiming he wanted to repent. What would he do when Voldemort actually came back? Was he afraid of future retribution? Severus only let out a soft chuckle and said calmly, "When did I ever betray the Dark Lord?" Naturally, the one who reacted loudest to Severus's words was Greyback. The werewolf nearly roared. "You've clearly sided with the Aurors. You even brought 2 people to find us at noon today. You meant to catch me and all my men in one sweep." And then, Severus raised an eyebrow, his casual tone cutting Greyback off. The werewolf gaped, consumed with rage but momentarily speechless. It was Barty who answered now, looking at Severus coldly. "And this is your performance? No matter how pathetic Fenrir is, he serves the Dark Lord. Attacking him like this, if it isn't betrayal, what is it?" "Serving the Dark Lord?" Severus sneered. "I think he's serving you, not the Dark Lord. What right has a carrion-eating brute like him to speak for Voldemort? He even flaunted the Dark Mark over Eastbourne, and in the name of the Death Eaters, he's been snatching wizarding children. Is any of that really the Dark Lord's intention?" "Don't play word games, Snape." Barty snapped, lifting his chin as if to look down his superiority. "We gathered here to find our missing master. Your actions are undermining that." Severus didn't flinch. "On the contrary, your blustering public displays are exactly what will undermine the Dark Lord's return." He vanished to find a safe place to recover and lie low. "What you're doing now is the ultimate betrayal." Barty's face hardened. The surrounding Death Eaters shifted uneasily, caught between the two of them, and uncertain who was right. They had come at Barty's summons under the pretext that he had found clues to Voldemort's disappearance, and now Severus sounded like someone who understood the situation better, and who seemed to be preparing for something else entirely. "You sided with Dumbledore," Barty spat. "You publicly repented in the Ministry in front of all of Britain. Is that loyalty?" "If we don't lie low with the Dark Lord and wait for the day he returns," Severus shot back, "why would we squander our strength with conspicuous attacks like yours? You're just making excuses for betrayal. You're the one trying to strike out on your own and form a new band of Death Eaters," Severus said flatly. The label hit Barty like a blow. His pupils narrowed. His followers recoiled a step. Fury warped his face. He pointed his wand at Severus and snarled, "You dare question my loyalty to the Master. You dare even kill your own father," Severus returned coldly. "Who's to say your loyalty isn't just as twisted as your filial devotion?" The happiest observer, if that was the word, was another Severus, but a ghost. Ghost Snape had nearly gone numb under Severus's barbs. Now at last, he saw someone else being shredded by the same relentless verbal assault. He reveled silently in it. Barty's anger flared until his wand tip glowed green. Severus, wand already in his hand, prepared to duel. Then a shout rang out from outside the window. It was enough to knock the edge off Barty's fury. Suspicion replaced blind rage. "You were stalling for time, waiting for the Aurors to surround us." The Death Eaters who had been wavering now realized what might be happening. They raised their wands and trained them on Severus. Severus met Barty's stare and sneered. "Seems you've planted a mole among the Aurors through your father's channels." "Snape, no matter how clever your words, the Master will know what you've done. When he truly returns, he will judge who betrayed him." Barty barked. With that final accusation, he apparated away, and his companions apparated after him. Almost at once, there was the sound of flying brooms and the pounding of feet below. A swarm of Aurors burst into the Old Crouch Manor. Scrimgeour, Robards, and Kingsley arrived on the second floor with grim faces. "Trace the apparition points immediately. Robards, take a team and pursue," Scrimgeour ordered. Watching the Aurors who had finally arrived too late to prevent the chaos, Severus offered them no courtesy. "I did warn you," he said to Scrimgeour, "that you can't trust every Auror in your office." Scrimgeour's usual hardness had been tempered. He took a breath, lowered his posture, and gave a stiff nod. "This is on us. We left those we suspected at the Ministry, but we didn't expect someone among the arrivals to be under Imperio." Severus thought back over the last frantic hours. After Richard Crouch Sr.'s collapse, he and Kingsley had rushed back from Azkaban. Even as they approached the manor, Severus had sensed something wrong. He realized Barty was not bound by the Imperius. He had assembled anyone he could summon, taken a wand, and planned a move against his own father. That changed everything. If Barty had been Imperio-controlled, subduing Crouch Sr. would have solved it. But a self-directed, dangerous Barty would be hard to capture. Severus had no time for subtleties. He sent Kingsley straight to the Ministry for reinforcements and stayed to hold things together, buying time until anti-apparition charms and a proper force could be raised. Now the result was plain. The Ministry was as unreliable as ever. When Severus had been wanted, only Kingsley had stood firm. The rest had been useless. And when Severus needed them, they were still useless, bumbling, ill-prepared, a flock of incompetents that let things slip through their fingers. He had to rely on himself and the few who could be trusted. Even if you send people after him now, it'll be very difficult to catch him. Severus waved a hand dismissively. If he contacted that pack of werewolves a long time ago, then he had ties to the outside world already. He didn't need to wait until today to act. And since they chose to move today, it means they were ready, and they won't let you find him. Scrimgeour had to admit Severus's reasoning made sense, but even a sliver of hope required sending Aurors to try. If Barty Crouch Jr. had truly escaped, wizards and witches would live in dread. This wasn't like a run-of-the-mill prisoner. Barty Jr., young as he was a notorious and vile Death Eater. Before his arrest, he and the Lestranges had used the Cruciatus Curse to drive the Longbottoms insane. It had been Barty Crouch Sr. himself who had convened the Wizengamot and seen his son sentenced to life in Azkaban. The case had caused an uproar and even swayed the selection of the next Minister for Magic. And now, that Death Eater had escaped from a prison that hadn't seen an escape in over 200 years, and the man who had put him there had apparently helped him flee. With an event like that, the Ministry dared not suppress the press. From what Barty Jr.'s group had already shown, they had no intention of keeping quiet. The public would learn soon enough. Scrimgeour could imagine the storm of fear and outrage that would sweep the wizarding world. "Mr. Snape, do you have any other findings you can share?" Scrimgeour asked. He sounded humbler than anyone would have expected, this austere head of the Auror Office, who'd always been suspicious of anyone with a tainted past, now lowering himself to ask Severus for help. Kingsley beside him showed no surprise. He knew his superior well. Scrimgeour could be willful and stubborn, but his stance on Death Eaters and dark wizards had always been ironclad. Severus didn't bother to soften his expression. If the Aurors had been more dependable, tonight would have gone according to his plan. Instead, Barty Jr. had escaped with a group of followers. It didn't touch Severus personally, but Harry, Hermione, and Lupin were still in the hands of those werewolves. Other findings. "What do you take me for, some great seer?" "There's nothing." He turned toward the stairs. "You missed your best chance. You'll have to do your own legwork from here. I'm not staying." He'd barely taken 2 steps down when he stopped and turned back, fixing Scrimgeour with a hard look. "Now that you've sorted your internal problems, if you're going to investigate that pack of werewolves, don't send any idiots my way." Then he left without a backward glance, leaving a stunned Scrimgeour and a sighing Kingsley. With Barty Jr. still at large, Severus had to move fast. He needed to coordinate with old Lupin and the Grangers to rescue the children those werewolves had captured. He had no time to spend arguing with the Aurors. In another light, Barty Jr. gathering followers wasn't entirely bad. Before Voldemort's return, that ragged group was unlikely to accomplish anything significant. Their eagerness might mean they were vulnerable and could be cleaned up sooner. The only question was whether Lucius and the others would fall into the trap. Of course, that all depended on one thing. Harry must not end up in their hands. The best news was they didn't yet know Harry had been taken. Harry was with Lupin, and Lupin would recognize the son of his old friend. Severus rubbed his chin and borrowed a broomstick from a nearby Auror. After apparating to the closest point to the Isle of Man, he mounted and set off to rendezvous with Lupin and the Grangers. "You overused dark arts spells today. Did you notice anything off about your incantations?" Ghost Snape spoke up while they were in transit, surprising Severus. It was rare for the old greasy apparition to show concern. "It still feels inconsistent. Didn't you say if I used the spells more often, the problem would disappear?" "That was my earlier judgment," Ghost Snape replied flatly. "But after watching you today, especially your dark arts, I've made a new observation." Severus felt a spark of hope. He cared deeply about his skill with magic. If he was to run with Harry and confront hardened Death Eaters like Barty Jr., he needed power he could rely on. Talent determined much of witchcraft. He had reached a high level already, among the very best, alongside Hogwarts professors and core Death Eaters like Bellatrix and Barty Jr., but he had long suspected a ceiling. If he could still climb, he might stand on equal footing with Dumbledore and Voldemort. "I thought you'd learned everything from me. Incantations, methods, the dark arts, but from today, it's clear you're still in a period of adaptation," Ghost Snape said, his tone surprisingly serious. "Adaptation period?" Severus echoed, puzzled. "You mean my current level hasn't reached the peak you intended?" "No," Ghost Snape said calmly. "It's not an adaptation to me. It's an adaptation of your soul to magic. Magic grows from a person's thoughts. Things like a wand and the Patronus charm vary from person to person. Although other spells don't show it as blatantly, they carry subtle differences in each caster's hands. And your thinking is now clearly different from my former self. yet your magical techniques and mindset still follow my old patterns. That restricts the spells that should be even stronger in your hands." Severus understood. The logic was simple. He'd hit the limit of the original Snape's skill, but not yet his own true height. He dropped his usual sharp retorts and asked, almost humbly, "Then how should I adjust?" Ghost Snape didn't sneer. His attitude had shifted after watching Severus's confrontation with Barty Jr. "First," he said, "you need to change your wand. Tomorrow I will update 10,000 words, split into 3 chapters. 1 chapter of 4,000 words at 12 p.m. and 2 chapters of 3,000 words at 10 p.m. If nothing unexpected happens, I will update it these times every day for the next few days. I will announce any changes." "I told you, Professor is different now." After Greyback left with most of his men, Harry, hiding in the camp on the Isle of Man, whispered excitedly to Lupin. Lupin did not deny it. Having heard Greyback mention Severus Snape again, he could faintly feel Harry might be right. Greyback was put on the back foot by him. That camp must have someone to rely on. Leaving with so many followers probably means he's going to fetch reinforcements. "But none of them can beat Professor, right?" Harry asked with full confidence. Seeing how completely Harry trusted Snape, Lupin still felt a little unreal. James's son, Sirius Black's godson. Snape's pupil? He shook his head to clear the thought and answered, "Snape's power is indeed considerable. In his school days, he was the most talented in Slytherin, and by his later years, he'd already invented many dark arts spells of his own. If you count people in the wizarding world who could claim a consistent victory over him, you could name them on one hand." However, Lupin looked at the 3 werewolves left in the camp and didn't finish the sentence aloud. From the size of the force Greyback could call up, it was obvious the person connected to this pack was a high-ranking Death Eater. A force like that isn't something every Death Eater can muster. It's reserved for core members you-know-who trusts. If that's true, Lupin couldn't be sure how Snape would act when he met such a Death Eater. He held that worry back. Harry's faith in his teacher was absolute, and for Lupin, everything about Snape was still second-hand. While Harry and Lupin murmured, they noticed Hermione sitting not far away, her back to them. Her small body trembled as if she were quietly crying. The two glanced at each other and sat down beside her. They discovered Hermione's hair had grown wildly long. Her usually bushy brown hair reached almost to her waist. She held the long hair in her arms as if hiding it and sobbed. "Hermione, what's wrong?" Harry demanded, shocked. The usually composed Hermione had lost her usual strength. Her eyes were red as she wiped away tears. I don't know," she said. "I was just thinking about my mum and dad. They're not wizards. I was wondering if they'd even noticed I'm missing yet. Then I started crying, and while I was crying, my hair just started growing out of control." Lupin listened with surprise and looked at the long hair in her lap. "This is a sign of magic, Hermione," he said gently. Harry's mind flashed back to his childhood with the Dursleys. "Aunt Petunia used to try to cut my hair, but as soon as she'd finish, in less than a day it would be back the way it was." Hermione stopped crying long enough to look up at Lupin in astonishment. "I am?" Lupin nodded. "Yes, like Dudley was once rumored to be, you're a young witch." Hermione was stunned by the news. She stammered, full of uncertainty she'd never shown before. But my mum and dad are just ordinary people. No one says only the children of witches and wizards can be magical," Lupin explained with a small smile. "The light of magic can ignite in any child. Muggle children can be witches or wizards, and the children of wizards sometimes show no magic at all. There's no absolute rule." Harry beamed. "That means you'll get into Hogwarts too. We can be classmates." Hermione's face, though, didn't brighten. She hugged her knees and buried her face again. Harry looked puzzled, but Lupin understood why she was upset. Both children had been captured by werewolves. Harry believed his teacher would come to save him. Greyback's words had even confirmed that. They'd been taken for less than a night, and Snape had already come knocking. But Hermione's parents were ordinary muggles. They wouldn't know about magic, let alone be able to rescue her. A sensitive child like Hermione didn't just feel sad because her parents hadn't come. She felt the difference between herself and Harry. "Would you two like to hear the story of the first time I showed signs of magic at home?" Lupin asked, lowering his voice in a way meant to spark their curiosity. Harry and Hermione leaned in. The girl wiped her eyes and looked up. Lupin put his hands on his knees and began to remember. It was when I was 8, around the month of my 8th birthday. My parents had brought me to Scotland because the previous full moon I'd transformed, and they'd nearly lost control of me. I'd broken a neighbor's fence and made a fuss, so they hid me in a rural village in Scotland. I liked that place. There were many children my age, warm, lively kids who didn't exclude me for being new or shy. They invited me to their homes to pick crisp fruit, fed me apple pie, took me to explore caves, and dragged me out to play on the grass. But the kinder they were, the more frightened I became. In my heart, I knew I was different. When they came for me, I started to hide. I avoided them, didn't visit their houses, and didn't play their games. If I hadn't felt their friendliness, maybe it wouldn't have hurt so much. But when I had the chance to run and leap in the sun like them, and could only curl up in the shadows and watch from afar, I was very, very sad. I began to hate myself. I lost my appetite, wouldn't speak to my parents, and sat by the river all day thinking maybe I should just end my short life. You probably think I actually would have done it, he added when Harry gasped. He smiled faintly. If I had, you wouldn't know me as Remus. It was my father, Lyle, who noticed. If you could see who my father is now, you'd find it hard to imagine how shy and withdrawn he once was. He's an authority on non-human beings. He met my mother while investigating a boggart in a Welsh forest. She was a muggle who worked in an insurance office in Cardiff. He saved her from that boggart, and yet he waited months before confessing his feelings, embarrassed to admit the boggart wasn't dangerous. But because of my birth and what had happened to me, he changed. He had to support the family and set an example. He went from shy to steady and decisive. He taught me from an early age how to recognize dark creatures, showed me their weaknesses, and taught me how to survive. He wanted me to understand that werewolves aren't demons. They have flaws and weaknesses like any being. But that month in the Scottish countryside, I was desperate. I thought I'd be lonely and an outcast forever. A few days before the full moon, one night I slipped out. I never went out on nights with a moon, especially near full. I was terrified of that body in the sky that would turn me into a monster. That night, I didn't want to be at home, but I didn't dare be touched by moonlight outside, so I ran to the cave those children had shown me and hid inside, clutching a felt toy my mother had given me for my 7th birthday, crying. The wind was strong that night. I didn't hold the toy tightly enough. It blew away and landed on a branch on a steep slope near the cave. I loved that toy and climbed to get it, not caring how high it was. Once I'd grabbed it, fear set in. The moon was big and bright, almost full. I clung to the tree trunk with the toy under my arm, my hands shaking. I called for help, but no one answered. Only the wind buffeted me, and I felt weaker by the minute, sure I'd fall any second. I must have been up there half an hour, 40 minutes, I can't remember. Just as I felt despair, I heard my father call my name. I answered between sobs, and he found his way to the cave's edge. He could have used magic to get me down easily, but he didn't. Instead, he gripped a rock at the cave's mouth with one hand and reached out with the other, telling me to take his hand. I was terrified, not just of the height, but of the moon. Lyle knew my fear better than I did, but he knew that if I didn't face it that night, I'd never step out of that darkness. I accused him then. Why didn't he use magic? I shouted, "I can't, Dad! I can't do it! My hands have no strength. You can say a spell." He was patient. He encouraged me. "Remus, we can't kneel before fear. Whether it's the sun or the moon, they are things we must stand tall and look at." I was sobbing like a child, but I heard him. His words stuck with me forever. I fought my shaking, let go of the trunk, and reached for his hand. He was so happy. I can imagine how he wanted to pull me into his arms and praise me as his pride, but the branch couldn't take my weight. It snapped. Hermione covered her mouth with a gasp. Harry gripped a corner of his robes. Lupin continued, calm. My father had actually been ready. He had his wand out and had prepared every precaution. If I had fallen, he could have made sure I wasn't harmed. But before he could act, I was suddenly back in the cave, clutching the felt toy. Lyle had already lifted me up. He was cheering and shouting, "Remus, did you see that?" You did it all yourself. You aren't full of flaws you don't belong. You are brave, clever, and unique." Lupin blinked and met Hermione's eyes. "Do you think he was right?" Hermione nodded vigorously through her tears. "Your father was absolutely right, Mr. Lupin." Lupin smiled softly. "It's the same for you, Hermione. Your parents, ordinary muggles, are unique to you. They love and care for you. With them around, you aren't any less than anyone else, and you never will be. My parents never thought I was less than anyone." He spoke slowly and gently, soothing the sensitive girl. Hermione's sadness melted. She smiled with the confidence she usually showed. Harry looked at Lupin and asked curiously, "Mr. Lupin, does your father know what you're doing now?" Lupin fell silent for a long moment before answering softly, "It's been a very, very long time since I went home." Both Harry and Hermione asked in confusion, "Why?" "I don't know exactly why," Lupin admitted, "but he's always felt guilty about me. I've been wandering and living poorly, and I haven't dared to disturb his life." 2 more chapters at 10 p.m. As the afternoon sun gilded the Isle of Man ferry terminal, Lupin and Granger stepped onto the island together. Thanks to Granger's careful planning, Lupin wore a loud Hawaiian shirt, tropical shorts, and a straw hat. He showed no sign of being a wizard. He looked every inch a muggle on holiday. 2 years ago, when I brought Hermione here, she didn't care so much about her front teeth yet, Granger said, voice soft with memory. "I've never raised a son, but girls are more sensitive. Hermione acts confident, but Jane and I both know that sometimes it's just a mask." Lupin tugged at the elastic waistband of the shorts and grinned wryly. "Children are like that. When Remus grew up, he learned to laugh at the stupid things he did. When he was at Hogwarts, his mother and I would tease him about those old times." They traded parenting stories all the way to the pier and then turned to the main business at hand. "We can't just wait around for Severus," Granger said. "The Isle of Man isn't large. We should do some preliminary scouting." Lupin nodded. "Do you have a plan?" "We saw that group this morning. Quite a few adults and 7 or 8 children," Granger replied. "If they move around the island, it won't be easy to hide. And from the way they behaved, I suspect they aren't very good at blending in as muggles. If they're hiding here, they'll pick somewhere remote, maybe a coastal cave, like those near Eastbourne," Lupin agreed. Granger led him to the map board near the pier and pointed out the island. "Most of the population is clustered here in Douglas, in the southeast, over 20,000 people. They wouldn't choose that. Then there's Peel on the west coast, Castletown in the south, and Ramsey in the north. Those 4 centers and their surroundings gather most of the scattered farms. The areas left are the ones they might favor." He swept his finger up the map and indicated the center and north. "The central hills are sparsely populated. Up north, there's a large plain good for farming, lots of land owned by big farms, and not many people live there either." Lupin liked the logic. "Wizards are often poor at practical reasoning. Magic often lets you sidestep logic," he said. "I can apparate to Diagon Alley, rent a broom, and sweep the areas you marked. But if that group has been using muggle-repelling charms, muggles won't find them." Granger nodded. "I won't go with you. I'll visit the local marine environmental organization and borrow their recent coastal records. They monitor and clean the shoreline regularly. If the werewolves favor coastal sites, their logs might show something." They moved efficiently. Even without Severus, once Granger set the plan, they sprang into action. Lupin apparated to Diagon Alley, rented a broom, returned to the island, cast disillusionment on himself and the broom, and began sweeping the marked areas from the air. Granger changed into suitable clothes and, posing as a doctor, secured permission to borrow the environmental records. When night fell and Severus apparated to the island, after tracking Crouch's house and flying in on a broom, they met in a small hotel. Hearing what Lupin and Granger had discovered was the best news Severus had had that day. Any 2 teammates he'd pick at random would be better than the fools at the ministry. "All right," Severus said, face grave. "Let's pool what we know." He went first. "After I found Kingsley, we went to Azkaban and confirmed the suspicions I'd raised in my letter. Then we moved against Crouch to catch him and his son in the act. It turned out Barty's son had already taken control of his father. Among his associates was Fenrir Greyback, the werewolf we ran into this morning. I tried to bring Aurors in for a sweep, but internal problems in the Auror office meant the plan fell apart. So the bad news: the werewolves may have more support, and Barty might recruit dark wizards to back them. The good news is that once they'd escaped the Crouch House, Greyback likely became a liability to Barty. They looked down on werewolves. Using them caused chaos and forced the Ministry to overextend itself, loosening Crouch Sr.'s oversight. Now that he's achieved that, Barty may well cast them aside. Granger frowned. That's not necessarily good. If they're abandoned, they might panic and act recklessly. The children could be in real danger. There's that risk, Severus agreed. But I know Barty. He's not crude. If he abandons them, he'll do it by contrivance, not by simply letting them run wild. He'll find an excuse to send them away temporarily. Lupin and Granger exchanged a look, then Lupin spoke. I flew over the areas Granger marked until sunset. I found nothing in the Central Hills, unless they're hidden in an unremarked cave. The farms and pastures up north showed no traces of magical activity. Until I reached the island's northernmost edge. There's a plantation there. Something about that wood felt wrong, like the residue of a muggle-repelling charm. When I lowered altitude, I didn't spot anything obvious, but the sense was there. Granger's eyes lit up. Is that Point of Air? Lupin checked their maps and nodded. Yes, right at the northern tip, near the coast. Granger leaned over the environmental records. I checked the organization's surveys. They found nothing on the shoreline, but this plantation, private woodland on the island, was recorded at about 80.3 acres originally. Over the next surveys, that figure shrank. Roughly half an acre seems to have gone missing. They kept checking and couldn't find any explanation. They thought it was a data error. But if a group had been occupying a small patch of the plantation for some time, that could explain the discrepancy. Severus allowed himself a rare smile. Excellent. The Aurors wouldn't have found that. Very good work. They stood up at once. With a target, they lost no time. As midnight approached, the island's residents slept and the neon of the bars lit the waterfront. Severus, Lupin, and Granger crossed into the plantation in the north. Not long after they entered the wood, Severus halted. Wait, was the anomaly Lyle found in the northwest? Yes, right at the outer edge, Lupin said. There's definitely a magical residue here, but something else seems to be masking it. Severus pulled a small phial of red liquid from his robe. Ashwinder blood. Hard to get, but it's very sensitive to magical traces. It'll show us what's hidden. He crouched and carefully uncorked the phial, letting a thin stream fall to the earth. The blood crawled over the ground like coals, spreading in a branching web. The crimson lines fanned from the northwest across to the northeast. We're in the right place, Severus said. There's a large-scale muggle-repelling charm here, covering nearly 2 acres from west to east. Granger met Lupin's eye. Do we rush in? No, Severus said firmly. The area is too large and we can't pin down their exact position. If we make a noise, they have the numbers to apparat away or use port keys. He raised his wand and gave orders. I'll go to the Ministry and bring a few trustworthy people. They can set up anti-apparition wards. Wait here and don't let them spot you. Lupin bowed his head. Don't worry, I'll disillusion both Granger and myself and wait here. Severus didn't linger. He apparated to the Ministry, sought out Kingsley and a handful of reliable Aurors who could cast the necessary wards, and within minutes was back at the plantation ready to move. Godric's Hollow, southwest England, a small, partly wizarding village, once the home of Harry's parents and the last known location of the Dark Lord before his disappearance. After escaping from the Crouch household, Barty Crouch Jr. and his group apparated repeatedly until they reached a safe house they had prepared. Using a port key inside, they finally shook off the Aurors who had been dogging them. Now they sat in a hidden cabin in Godric's Hollow, the dim lamplight throwing long shadows over the gathered Death Eaters. You said you had a lead on the Dark Lord when you wrote. Crouch, what happened? Demanded Roll, a blonde, impatient, careless Death Eater. At his words, the others turned to the man who had summoned them. Barty, seated in the center, the wand resting in his hand. Snape's warning, I think you're trying to start a new Death Eater faction, still hung in the air. Even the most reckless among them knew that, for those who believed in blood purity, Only the vanished Dark Lord could restore them to power. No one else could truly lead them, certainly not a young man like Barty, in his 20s, a late recruit with little seniority. The only reasons they listened to him were his claim of a lead on Voldemort and the ruthless way he dealt with the Lestranges, and most recently with his own father in the old Crouch Manor. Barty didn't answer at once. He sat steadily, legs crossed, methodically wiping the dust from his wand before lifting his head to meet their gazes. "You doubt my loyalty to the Master?" His question wasn't sharp, but his tone was bone-cold. One by one, eyes dropped until his stare landed on Roll. Roll shivered despite himself. Maybe it was the oppressive gaze, or a memory of Barty's madness in torturing his own father. In any case, he chose subservience. "No, of course I don't doubt your loyalty to the Master," he stammered. I'm only worried about the Master. He's been missing so long that many in the wizarding world are forgetting his place. We must find him quickly, right?" "But not now," Barty said flatly. "At the moment, Aurors from the Ministry will be hunting us like mad dogs. None of them can bear letting the Death Eaters rise again. If we go looking for the Master now, we'll only invite disaster." "But if we find him, we won't have to fear the Aurors anymore," Bruno Selwyn objected. He was from the Selwyn family, one of the Sacred 28. Barty shrugged. Snape was right about at least one thing. This is not the time for the Master's return. He needs time to heal. We must not draw attention to him. "Then what do we do? Sit here and wait for the Aurors to come knocking?" Greyback snapped. "Not exactly." Barty rose. "I'll go find some old acquaintances. Their loyalty to the Master may not be absolute, but neither do they fully trust the Ministry. They'll be glad to see me." "What about us?" Dino Perkins demanded. "Don't worry," Barty said, standing deliberately. "In these dark, difficult days, with comrades betraying or being taken, you were the first to respond and prepared to welcome the Master's return. When the Master comes back, I will report each of your contributions and sing your praises. I will never go back on my word." The cabin was silent. These were killers, not fools, and they all knew words could be hollow. But magical binding was different. Barty reached a decision. "I'll make an unbreakable vow." He knelt on one knee and extended his right hand. "Roll will bind me. Selwyn will witness. We will make this vow. When the Dark Lord returns, I will present your merits and commend your loyalty. I will never break this promise." The others caught their breath. A casual promise could be discarded. A vow could not. Roll didn't hesitate. He knelt opposite Barty, grasped Barty's wrist, and said loudly, "Our loyalty to the Dark Lord is unwavering, but such a guarantee from you is welcome." Selwyn raised his wand and stood over their joined hands. "Begin," Barty said. Selwyn touched the tip of his wand to their clasped hands and spoke the binding spell. Roll recited the vow, and Barty echoed his agreement. A thin, dazzling tongue of fire leapt from the wand like a red-hot wire, wound itself around their joined hands, and then vanished. The room practically exhaled. Faces softened. Relief showed where suspicion had been. "Don't worry, Crouch," someone said. "Go contact those former associates. We'll help distract the Aurors." "You don't need to," Barty replied. "Leave that to Fenrir." He flicked his wand to brush dust from his knees and looked at Greyback. Greyback blinked in surprise. "You remember what I told you? 'Cause a commotion. Didn't you capture a group of children?" Greyback's mouth twisted into a vicious grin. "Those brats? I caught 4 young wizards and 3 muggles. I plan to turn them next month during the full moon." The others shifted, uneasy. It wasn't so much that Greyback's cruelty shocked them as that it made them consider their own children. Barty, however, listened coolly. "Leave 4 out of the 7. Kill the rest, then display the dark mark." Greyback's eyes narrowed into beast-like slits. The barbaric pleasure at the thought of blood showed on his face. "I'll pick 3 at random. I'll make sure at least one of them is a young wizard. If the Aurors don't take it seriously, it will be worse for us." "Pick as you like. When you're done, disappear. The Ministry will be hunting you hard," Barty said, sinking back into his chair and pouring himself a cup of tea. "The rest of you, hide and wait for my word." They all nodded, then apparated away. When the cabin was empty, save for Barty, he stared at the single lamp as it swayed in the draft and allowed himself a brief, satisfied smile. Greyback was beyond pleased as he led his pack back to their camp on the Isle of Man. Nothing had gone wrong. The three werewolves left behind had kept to orders and never let their wands leave their sides, giving Remus no chance. When Greyback arrived at the tattered tent where Harry and the others slept, he found Lupin sitting outside. Lupin had been idly plotting ways to tip off allies, but the sight of Greyback approaching with a hostile group made his stomach drop. "The children are asleep," one of Greyback's men lied. "It's best not to disturb them." "Get out of the way," Greyback snarled and shoved Lupin to the ground. Two werewolves yanked back the tent flap. Inside, 7 children stared up, suddenly and terribly awake. Harry and Hermione clutched each other's hands, faces drained of color. "All right, little brats," Greyback announced, clapping his hands as if starting a cruel game. His smile was hideous. "Tonight I'm going to play a game with you, a game where only 4 of you survive." The children were driven out of the tent and forced to stand in a line. Greyback found a chair and sat down in front of them. "Originally," he said, "I planned to complete the glorious transformation for all of you. Unfortunately, not all of you are worthy of drinking moonlight." His eyes raked over the 7 children, as if savoring the fear written on their faces. Lupin had only just managed to crawl upright when 2 werewolves pinned him back down and bound him with rope. "Wait, Fenrir," he shouted. "You said they would all become one of us. You said the pack would grow. Why have you changed your mind and want to kill them?" He begged, trying to make Greyback relent. Lupin had clung to the hope that Greyback's purpose in seizing the children was to turn them into werewolves. Now, having no idea what the leader had seen that afternoon, Lupin could not understand why Greyback suddenly decided to discard 3 of the 7. Lupin wanted to protect every child, regardless of their origins or who their parents were. None of these lives should be taken. Greyback ignored him. He waved a hand to one of his followers, who stepped forward and cast Petrificus Totalis on Lupin. Apart from his staring, bloodshot eyes, he was immobilized. The camp fell quiet again, save for the youngest children's sobs and Greyback's booming laughter. "You're all lucky I'm an enlightened leader," Greyback crowed. "I'll give you a choice. The 7 of you have 10 minutes to pick 3 of your own to die. If you can't decide, I will decide for you, and for every minute you waste past that, I'll add another to the list. If you still hesitate at 14 minutes, well, next full moon we won't need new companions so urgently." The older children stared wildly, panicked and confused. The youngest, 6 or 7, understood only terror. Around them the other werewolves leaned in, delighted. They loved this sort of cruelty, the drama of friends forced to turn on one another to survive. Then the dark-haired boy stepped forward from the group. He looked pale and breathless, but resolute. He planted himself directly in front of Greyback. Lupin's pupils tightened. He strained against the spell like a man about to burst, but he could do nothing. "You don't have to hurt them," he managed. The boy's voice shook, but he met Greyback's gaze without flinching. "I'll do it. I alone am enough." Hermione reached instinctively for his arm, but he didn't give her the chance. Tears filled her eyes as she watched him go to the front. The other children stared at him in disbelief. The werewolves around them laughed and mocked the brazen child. Greyback's sneer deepened. "Who do you think you are? The famous savior? What right have you to take the place of 3 children?" The boy stared straight into the werewolf leader's vertical pupils. "My name is Dudley Dursley," he said, "and my teacher is Severus Snape." At the sound of that name, the camp went suddenly silent. Greyback's smile stiffened, then curdled into an ugly expression. He sprang up, grabbed the boy by the collar, and hauled him so close that the stench of his fetid breath hit the child. "Snape's student," he hissed. The boy breathed fast and shallow, but did not look away. "He beat you into a pathetic retreat this afternoon," the boy said. The other children stared, incredulous. Even the werewolves exchanged stunned looks. A child, Snape's student, had the nerve to say that to Greyback? Greyback hissed, baring yellow, jagged teeth. He clutched the boy tighter and barked an order. "Daily Prophet, bring me today's paper." A subordinate hurried off and returned with a copy. The front page still had the morning's story about a captured Muggle family. On the second page was a picture from 2 days earlier. A group photo from the day the trial ended, Severus and his party of 5 raising their glasses at a German restaurant. In the photo, the boy sitting beside Severus was smiling, cup in hand, perfectly ordinary and unmistakable. Greyback lowered the paper slowly, then looked back at the boy with greedy, hungry eyes. He laughed, wild and satisfied. Ha ha! So Snape's student was in my hands already. No wonder he was so eager to help the ministry hunt me. Afraid, weren't you? He slapped the man who'd fetched the paper to the ground. Worthless, he snapped. You caught this boy yesterday, and no one recognized him? If I'd known his identity earlier, today would have gone differently. The werewolves bowed their heads. No one answered. Greyback's gaze returned to the boy, and he spoke with possessive relish. Don't worry, brat. You're far too useful. As Snape's student, you're worth more than the rest. I won't kill you. Even if the others die, I'll keep you alive until the full moon. The boy's eyes widened. His breathing hitched. He hadn't expected this. He struggled in Greyback's grip and shouted, Coward! My teacher drove you off like a stray. All you do is take it out on innocence. So what? Greyback laughed. Do you really think when he finds out his student turned into a werewolf, he'll still claim you? Do you think I can't tell the world I was forced to do it by him? Do you think his reputation survives that? The boy stopped fighting, staring at Greyback as if trying to comprehend how anyone could be so shameless. Aren't you afraid he'll come for you? The boy managed, his voice small. Even he could hear how hollow the threat sounded. Greyback laughed and tossed the boy aside onto the grass. Another werewolf pinned him down. Then Greyback, eyes blazing, turned to the remaining 6 children. Find me? He spat. I'm right here. If Severus Snape is so effective, tell him to come and find me. I'll be waiting for him. Silence fell. Greyback laughed again, loud and triumphant, but just 2 seconds after the sound died, something moved through the night air, almost without sound. It was like a colder gust of wind, sharper than the rest, and then the world's light seemed to pause. The blade struck him. No one reacted in time. Despite his monstrous constitution and the kind of brute resistance to spells one would expect in a werewolf, the attack was impossible to withstand. The smile frozen on Greyback's face turned to shock, then to a howl as the weapon found its mark. From the waist down, his body gave way, collapsing in a grotesque, instant fracture. Blood gushed. Agonized howls tore the night as the brutal feast turned to a crimson carnage. The camp erupted into chaos. Werewolves snarled and leapt for the attacker. Children screamed and scrambled for safety. But where the blade had come from, and who had delivered such a precise, merciless strike, was not yet clear in the moonlit tumult. Chapter 96. Isn't this my grandnephew, Remus Lupin? Everyone present froze. No one could immediately react to what had just happened. Greyback's lower body had been cleanly sliced away. His upper torso collapsed to the ground as blood poured from the wound. A vicious dark arts curse kept tearing at him through the fresh injury, prolonging his agony. His howls sounded like the cries of a man being ripped apart limb from limb. Lupin, who had been struggling and staring at the ground, went numb. He certainly knew that spell. After all, it had been created specifically to deal with him. Or rather, with the 4 of them. Across the entire wizarding world, only one person, the spell's creator, used it. Only that one person could make a curse cut like that. What Lupin found almost impossible to believe was how fast it had happened. Greyback had been shouting a second before. The man who did this had been standing there the very next. The children had no idea what any of this meant. They screamed and clung to the person nearest them, unwilling to look at Greyback's mutilated body. Harry, who had been pinned to the ground by one of the attackers, watched in a daze. He had never seen that spell before and had no idea who had cast it. The other members of Greyback's group only reacted once the werewolf's pained cries began. They fumbled for their wands, but before they could even target an enemy, spells came at them from all directions, more than a dozen simultaneously. Kingsley and his aurors charged from the shadows of the trees, wands raised. Most of their spells struck Greyback's allies. A few of the attackers did manage to react, including the one who had been holding Harry down. In a panic, he grabbed Harry and tried to apparate away, but his shout of the spell did nothing. The ground was covered by an anti-apparition charm. Kingsley and his men had prepared thoroughly, following someone's instructions. No one would escape this time. Just as that attacker tried feebly to apparat again, a crimson beam of light struck him and froze his body, robbing him of any ability to cast or resist spells. Harry finally freed himself, ran to the huddled children, and shouted to calm them down. "Don't be afraid. Everyone, crouch down and don't move. The people who came to save us are here." He was brave and sensible enough to know the most important thing was to keep the children from running and getting hurt. The Aurors cleared the field swiftly. Although some people in certain circles might mistrust the ministry, to most witches and wizards, the Aurors represented the elite, those who had mastered powerful defensive magic like the shield charm. After Greyback, the leader of the attackers, was neutralized, the battle became one-sided. In less than 3 minutes, the camp that had been filled with screams fell eerily silent. The werewolves were subdued. Only then did 3 figures step out of the shadows. When the torchlight flickered across their faces, Harry called out excitedly, "Teacher, I knew it was you!" Hermione, tears still in her eyes, stared at one of the figures holding a long gun. She whispered, almost to herself, "Dad! Daddy!" Lupin, still on the ground, looked up and saw a figure in incongruous Hawaiian beach shorts holding a wand, a sight that did not match the memories he carried of the man. He couldn't speak or move, but his wide, shocked eyes said everything. Severus gave Harry a reassuring look, then strolled over toward Greyback, who was gibbering and thrashing on the ground. "What a coincidence, Fenrir," he said with a cool smile. "We met only 2 hours ago, didn't we? I didn't expect you'd miss me that much." "What were you shouting just now?" Greyback's howling ceased. He fixed Severus with a glare so full of hatred that, if looks could kill, Severus would have been cut to pieces long ago. "Kill me," he barked. "If you have the guts, kill me now." "Tsk. No." Severus shook his head and nodded toward Kingsley and the Aurors nearby. "Don't you see? The Fuzz are still here. I cast that spell partly because of your kind invitation and partly to protect the children. I was forced to act. Now that you've lost your ability to resist, if I kill you outright, I'd be a murderer." He crouched, looking down at Greyback with a smile that only the werewolf seemed to notice. "Let me tell you a secret. I could have sliced your head off with that spell. But remember what I told Barty? You're scavenging carrion." Greyback's eyes bulged. Severus continued softly, "That suits you. The Aurors will make sure you live, but they won't be inclined to try to reattach your lower half. They'll send you to Azkaban, and the Dementors will squeeze every last bit of value out of you." "Kill me," Greyback screamed in terror. "Snape, you coward! If you have the guts, kill me now. Why won't you kill me?" The werewolf was finished. As a natural werewolf, he had never learned many spells and carried no wand. His greatest weapons had always been his own body, his resistance to magic, and his superior physical constitution. Now, reduced to a cripple, he faced greater despair than death itself. Severus had no patience left for him. Standing up, he went to the children's side. A female Auror hurried over to comfort those still crying. Mr. Granger, Hermione's father, pulled his daughter into his arms. Even though Hermione's eyes were wet, she held her head high to show she hadn't been cowed. Harry bounced around Severus, radiating relief. "I knew it was you, Professor. I knew you'd find us," he said. "How did it feel?" Severus asked with a half-smile. "Scary, but also exciting," Harry admitted. "When I saw you at the end say you were Snape's student, I thought you weren't scared at all," Severus teased. "I was scared, of course," Harry said earnestly. "I was more afraid my friends would get hurt and I wouldn't be able to help." Severus put an arm around him. "Then remember that feeling. Let it be your motivation. Work so you never find yourself helpless like that again." "I will," Harry promised. Severus watched the scene with a complicated expression. Old Lupin, Remus's father, went to his son's side and released the Petrificus Totalis that had been binding him. "When you didn't write last week, I knew something was wrong," he said. "I went to Dumbledore and learned what had happened to you." Lupin hugged his father. "Thank you, Lyle." Lyle Lupin patted his son's shoulder. Then, as if a long-held decision had finally been made, he stepped back and spoke with a hesitant gravity. "I know why you didn't come home all these years. One reason was that you didn't want to trouble me every full moon. The other is because I've been keeping something from you." Lupin looked at him, then said quietly, "If there are things you don't want to tell me, it's okay. I'm not." "No, I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd blame me," Lyle interrupted. But after this, I can't keep it from you any longer, especially now that you've come face to face with him." He looked toward Greyback, who was now gagging and struggling against shackles as Kingsley and a couple of Aurors secured him. "The reason you became a werewolf is because he bit you when you were a child." Lupin showed surprise, but it was a calm, measured look. "Greyback bit many children. He bit me too. This wasn't your fault." "No, listen," Lyle insisted, cutting him off. He took a deep breath and met his son's eyes. "He didn't bite you at random. He did it to get revenge on me. That year, dark creatures were unusually active, the first stirrings of you-know-who's return. The Ministry called in experts. I was one of them. The Aurors captured Greyback then, but he posed as a muggle beggar and fooled the committee. I saw through him and urged they hold him until the month's full moon passed, but they wouldn't listen. I insulted him, told him he had no soul, that he deserved to die." He remembered. "The night before your 5th birthday, during the full moon, he found our home, transformed, and bit you. I drove him off, but from then on, you were a werewolf." Lyle's eyes were full of guilt. "It's my fault, Remus. Because of those words, his revenge fell on you. I never told you because I feared you'd blame me. Later, when you joined Greyback's pack undercover, I only feared he'd recognize you and discover what you were doing." For the first time, Lupin realized the motive behind the attack on him as a child. He had always thought a werewolf had broken into their house and bitten him, but never imagined it had been aimed at Lyle. He considered it, swallowed, then smiled and clapped his father on the shoulder. "Don't blame yourself, Lyle. You didn't do anything wrong then. The committee were fools for not listening to you, and Greyback is the one who did the evil. I'm not that rash, ignorant boy anymore. I understand causes and consequences. I know who's truly at fault." Lyle's eyes shone. He gripped his son's arm. "When this is over, come home with me. We'll live together. I can help watch over you on the full moons." Lupin paused, thinking hard, and then shook his head. "I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I still have things to do." Lyle looked puzzled. "What else? Does Dumbledore or the Ministry need you?" "It isn't them," Lupin said, glancing at Harry, who was recounting his ordeal with Seamus-like excitement around Severus. His expression was complicated. "That boy is the son of my best friend." Lyle blinked. "Severus's student?" Hearing the label still felt odd to Lupin. He nodded. "Yes, that's him." Lyle frowned. "Today, when we found the cliff in Eastbourne, it was Severus who discovered the clues you left on the rocks. He told me things about your school days." Lupin cut in, having already heard the details from Severus. "All right, I should apologize for not telling you earlier." "So what Severus said was true?" Lyle asked, staring into his son's face. "Your friend tried to trick him into going there while you were transforming so that you would kill him?" Lupin fell silent for a moment before answering. "I don't know what it's been like for you around Snape, Lyle, but the man I knew then is not the same as the rumors you've heard. Still, no matter what, this should never have happened," Lyle said heavily. "It's your friend's fault if they did that. If you didn't know, that's one thing. But if they tried to get you to kill Severus, they were trying to ruin you." As father and son spoke of the past, a familiar voice spoke nearby, cutting through the night. "It's been a long time. Isn't this my grandnephew, Remus Lupin?" Everyone looked toward the voice. 97. "This is your Uncle Granger." A voice both familiar and oddly off came from the side. Lupin turned and saw Harry bringing a grinning Severus toward them. Harry, who had intended to introduce his teacher to Mr. Peter, froze when he heard Severus address Lupin in that strange way. At that moment, readers might recall the usual adage, "Plenty of Taiwanese novels are waiting for you." Nephew? Lupin? Aren't you classmates? Are you relatives? Lupin didn't know what expression to wear when Severus called him nephew. Severus had already clapped Lyle on the shoulder. "Leal and I are like brothers. He's older than me, so I call him elder brother. Doesn't that make Lyle's son my nephew?" Harry scratched his head. Logically, the statement held up. Lupin, however, looked incredulous. He glanced from Severus to his father. Lyle, awkward under his son's stare, merely sighed and chose not to argue. "You'll need to sort your own matters out," he said finally. "Now that I know you're safe, I have less to worry about. As for what you do next, my house is open whenever you want to come back. If you have time, bring Robert by for a drink." That last remark was was aimed at Severus. Lyle then turned to leave. Severus didn't try to stop him, but before Lyle went, Severus offered one last warning. In the next few days, the Wizengamot will probably send you a letter, Lyle. Don't forget to sign for it. That letter will be important. Lyle frowned. A letter from the Wizengamot? Don't worry, it's a surprise. You'll see when it arrives. Only after Lyle left did Severus turn fully back to Lupin. Lupin had steeled himself somewhat and extended a hand. Long time no see. I hear you've changed a lot recently, almost a different man. Severus took his hand and shook it. As he had told Ghost Snape about the events at Hogwarts years ago, even if Lupin had played a part, he was the least to blame among the four. Given Severus's own position at the time, it wouldn't have been fair for Ghost Snape to heap all his anger on Lupin. It's been a long time, Severus said. You did very well as an undercover agent. Without the information you left behind, we wouldn't have found this place so quickly. Lupin stared at him for a moment. Severus raised an eyebrow. Something on my face? You really haven't just changed your looks. The old you would never have said something like that. Ghost Snape, torn between feelings about Severus and Harry, went as black as a pot bottom. Severus only chuckled. Then let's reintroduce ourselves properly. I am Severus Snape, an old friend of your father's, Harry Potter's teacher, a former head of house at Hogwarts, and currently unemployed. The titles were not the problem, until Severus added, Harry Potter's teacher. That sent Lupin's composure fraying again. He lowered his voice and asked, Does Dumbledore know about this? About Harry being hidden? Whether he knows or not doesn't change much. No, about you taking James's son and making him your student, Severus shrugged. If Dumbledore didn't know, how could I have gotten the chance to take Harry out? What was Dumbledore thinking? Lupin's voice grew urgent. Severus and Harry exchanged a glance, as Lupin drew Severus aside to speak where Harry couldn't hear. I don't believe your hatred for James has simply vanished, even if you've changed so much. Only a cold sneer met him. Severus looked at him with measured calm, about to reply, when Kingsley arrived. He had finished overseeing the scene, and now approached them, exhausted. Minister Bagnold will likely want to thank you personally, Kingsley said to Severus. It's been a hectic night. Director Barty Crouch has been taken back to the ministry. His case hasn't been made public yet, but the other directors and the minister are fully aware. They won't be able to keep this hidden forever, and if they do go public, we don't know how the magical community will react. Successfully capturing this pack of werewolves tonight is at least good news. From what I understand, the Daily Prophet will probably highlight the three of you to help restore public confidence. He glanced at Lupin, clearly not unfamiliar with this wandering 21. Remus, you'll get the same commendation. Lupin forced a bitter smile. Can the ministry trade those honors for some actual compensation? Don't worry, Kingsley patted his shoulder. The ministry won't mistreat you, and they won't let you lose the reputation you deserve. Maybe their motives aren't entirely pure, but given the current situation, they'll have to act. Whether you want it or not, you'll accept it. After a few more words and instructions, Kingsley looked toward Robert Granger, who was holding Hermione and murmuring to her, his face full of concern. I understand your muggle friend must have been crucial in finding the werewolves, but Severus, you know how strict the 9 is. Hermione is a young witch, Harry cut in. Having lived through the incidents with Sanguini and Volpe, he knew how serious a violation of the 9 could be. Severus wasn't surprised by Harry's interference. Lupin had seen enough to understand. Only Kingsley looked genuinely taken aback. If that's the case, once the ministry verifies it with Hogwarts, there won't be a problem. Moreover, as the muggle relative of a 25, he falls outside some of the 9's restrictions that could help with the ministry's next steps. Kingsley rubbed his forehead. Personally, and on behalf of the ministry, I'm very grateful to all of you. Although Crouch's case is far from finished, at least tonight brought some good news. Get some rest. You'll likely be summoned tomorrow. And about the Daily Prophet, he added, the ministry is working out how to present tonight's events to the public. Since the operation against the werewolves was a success, I expect your names will be mentioned. After farewells, Kingsley left with his Aurors, the arrested werewolves, and any children found whose parents weren't present. That left Severus, Harry, Lupin, and the Grangers at the scene. "Aren't they going to erase our memories?" Robert Granger asked. He had learned a bit about the wizarding world in the last 2 days and feared what might come next. "Hermione will become a witch. She has the talent," Severus assured him. "As the Muggle relative of a 25, you're not fully subject to the Nime and have rights to know." Granger listened astonished, then looked at Hermione with a mix of pride and worry. Hermione, trying to hide her own uncertainty about why her hair had suddenly grown so long, whether it was some form of 33, puffed out her chest and nodded. "Don't worry, there aren't that many real dangers in the magical world. Don't worry too much, Robert." Severus saw the concern in Granger and offered comfort. Granger relaxed and, full of praise, swung Hermione around once before saying his goodbyes. "We should go home quickly. Jean will be worried. She needs to hear the good news." "Use the flu network," Severus suggested. "The ministry should have a node on the island. I can temporarily connect your fireplace so you can return directly." Granger gratefully accepted. As Severus led Harry and the Grangers toward a ministry fireplace on the island, he glanced back at Lupin, who followed as if it were natural. "Aren't you going home with Lyle?" Lupin's expression was calm, unreadable. "There are still things I need to sort out. I won't be leaving with you. For now." Severus said nothing. When Dumbledore and Bagnold had assigned the mission, Severus had expected someone would be arranged to keep an eye on Harry after a single test. Dumbledore would not be so carefree as to let him go entirely unsupervised. The recipe for the improved wolfsbane potion was the best proof that someone would watch over him. Lupin was the most suitable candidate. Severus bore Lupin little ill will, but he couldn't resist making a little flourish. "Since we're going together, introductions are in order." He turned to Harry and the Grangers, offering a sweeping, almost theatrical statement. "This is your Uncle Granger. Your father and I share a life-and-death friendship, so it's only fitting he look after you." Just as Kingsley had predicted, the Ministry of Magic could not hide today's events from the public. This was not a simple scandal. It involved a head of department, a senior official in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the most powerful department of its kind, who had committed a crime. On top of that, a notorious Death Eater, Barty Crouch Jr., had escaped from Azkaban and already gathered a band of followers. It wasn't just claims anymore. The werewolves' actions proved they were active. The result was terrifying. Nearly everyone in the ministry and the wizarding public at large believed you-know-who was dead and could never return. But the resurgence of a group of Death Eaters now was exactly the thing no one wanted to see. Let the past stay in the past. Those who shouldn't appear should never show up. Fortunately, the case of the werewolves kidnapping children had been successfully resolved, which allowed the ministry to steer public opinion and refocus the wizarding public's attention. On July 23, 1989, today's edition of the Daily Prophet was delivered to thousands of wizarding homes across Britain. Every reader who bought this issue would later claim it was one of the best bargains they had ever made, rivaling even that Quibbler issue that came with a free magazine, because the amount of information packed into it was enormous. A standard copy of the Daily Prophet normally had 4 full-page spreads. The biggest headline would take the front page, and other important stories would be placed inside. But today's paper devoted the entire paper to a single subject. The front page headline screamed, "First escapee in the history of Azkaban." The secondary headline was hardly less eye-catching, "Sentenced by his own hand, rescued by his own hand, the merits and crimes of Department Head Crouch." Every other page was filled with reports connected to the Crouches, who Barty had recruited, his enlistment of Greyback and a band of werewolves, and even what had happened at Crouch Manor the previous night. And as if one explosive newspaper were not enough, an extra edition was delivered with it. A special supplement rushed out ahead of schedule, full of even more shocking revelations. Its front page read, "One day after publicly repenting at trial, he saves 7 families." Other headlines in the extra included, "Werewolves and Wolves, Humans Undercover Among Beasts, a Muggle's Journey into the Magical World to Rescue His Daughter." The news spread through the wizarding community like wildfire. First came the revelations about Crouch Manor. No one had expected old Barty, who had once presided over the Wizengamot and handed his own son a life sentence, to regain political credibility only to have it shredded 6 years later by disclosures that he had, 5 years ago, used his dying wife to swap his son out of Azkaban and aid his escape. The department head, whose career had seemed ruined, now found his reputation utterly destroyed. Within 3 days, the Wizengamot would hold a trial for his offenses. The man who once sat in judgment would become the one judged. Wizards who had once believed Crouch a promising candidate for Minister for Magic now sighed in dismay. The escaped Barty Crouch Jr. drew even more attention. The wizarding public was already familiar with his name from his trial 6 years earlier. Born in 1962 and imprisoned in late 1981 at 19, he was now 27. Not long after leaving Hogwarts, he and the Lestranges had tortured Aurors Frank and Alice Longbottom with the Cruciatus Curse to extract information about you-know-who's whereabouts. Old Barty had sentenced him to life in Azkaban, and the Wizengamot had passed that sentence unanimously. Now it emerged that 5 years ago his father had arranged his release, making Barty Crouch Jr. the first person in history known to have escaped from Azkaban. After the escape, he remained unrepentant, kept under Imperius by his father. When his father's control weakened, he contacted werewolves and other Death Eaters, Imperiused several Aurors in the Ministry, and triggered the whole werewolf affair. Worst of all, he had intended to torture his own father with Cruciatus and to kill him with the Killing Curse. Such callous betrayal and cruelty enraged almost every wizard in Britain, especially because the case had involved Fenrir Greyback abducting children. The prophet explained that, to avoid disrupting the Auror's investigation and to prevent the werewolves from panicking and harming the children, the Ministry had kept the affair out of the press until the children were safe, and Greyback, who had been wanted for over 20 years, had been brought to justice. The detailed account of the Greyback case was printed in the extra edition. It told of 3 people who took part in the hunt: a Hogwarts professor who, only 2 days earlier at a trial, had declared he wanted to repent and change his ways, a Muggle dentist whose daughter had been abducted, and a father who had once worked at the Ministry and had been a noted expert on non-human spirits. The 3 had worked together through the investigation. Midway through, it was the Hogwarts professor who discovered the crucial clues and led the rescuers to Crouch Manor in time, saving old Barty's life and nearly wiping out Barty's gang. The wizarding public devoured the reports like a gripping novel. If, after that trial, many people had still harbored suspicion and distrust about the reforms Severus Snape claimed he would pursue, 2 days later, that suspicion had turned to shock. Severus Snape was for real. Among the shocked was, naturally, Severus's former senior from Slytherin, an old friend from the Death Eaters, a wizard from an elegant and noble pure-blood family, Lucius Malfoy. When Lucius finished reading the Daily Prophet, his first thought was, Severus is playing this so big. But after rereading the paper, he dismissed the notion that Snape was merely putting on an act. Lucius had plenty of preconceptions about Severus, but he was no fool. Severus's actions did not look like a mere show. If he were just trying to dodge blame, there would have been no need to antagonize Barty. As one of the former inner circle of Death Eaters, Lucius knew Barty's standing: young, fiercely loyal to the Dark Lord, talented and trusted. Now that he had escaped Azkaban, he would surely seek out the Dark Lord. Whether the Dark Lord was dead or alive, Lucius suspected he was dead. Otherwise, Lucius would not so easily have given the diary Voldemort had provided to Ginny later. But even if the Master were gone, a faction of Death Eaters, led by Barty and convinced their master was simply missing, still existed. Severus's opposition to them was not something to take lightly. Worry gnawed at Lucius as he put down the paper, frowning over what these events might mean for him. As he brooded, Dobby the house elf suddenly appeared at his side. "Master, a guest claiming to be your friend has come to visit." Lucius's face went dark. He didn't say who he was. Dobby asked him, but he wouldn't tell Dobby. The elf drew back, eyes wide. "What does he look like? How old?" He covered his whole body. Dobby couldn't see what he looked like. Lucius's expression grew grimmer. Go back and tell him I'm in the middle of a very complex and dangerous spell experiment and have no time for visitors today. Perhaps I could be of some help?" A voice suddenly spoke. Lucius and Dobby turned toward the drawing room entrance, where a figure in a gray robe stood. No one knew when he had arrived. Barty Crouch Jr. slowly lowered his hood and smiled at Lucius. "Long time no see. Still fond of your magical experiments, Mr. Malfoy." Lucius's face hardened, and he snapped at Dobby. "Go back to your pit and punish yourself. Until you faint." Dobby began to sob and bang his head until he collapsed, and then vanished out of the room. In the next instant, the hard line in Lucius's features melted into a warm, spring-like smile. "It truly has been a long time, Barty Crouch Jr." Chapter 99, Ollivander's Wand Shop, thanks to CCPW for the Alliance Leader Reward. "Teacher, my robes are torn. Go find Lupin to mend them for you." "Teacher, there are scratches on my glasses. It's affecting my sight. Have Lupin fix them for you." "Teacher, have Lupin take care of it." "No, teacher, where is Mr. Lupin?" Severus, brushing his teeth in the hotel room early that morning, paused. He met Harry's bright, earnest eyes, then peered toward the door. "Wasn't he just here?" Just then, Lupin came up from downstairs carrying 3 breakfasts. "This hotel's breakfast only does 1 egg per person, but the milk is unlimited," he said with a trace of annoyance at the stinginess of the place. Severus approved of Lupin's proactive attitude. It wasn't that he actually wanted the down-on-his-luck werewolf babysitting him and Harry for its own sake. It was more that Ghost Snape had earned his compensation. Before they ate, Lupin, now reunited with his wand, had already used Reparo to fix Harry's glasses and mend the tear in his robes. Years wandering the wizarding world had turned Lupin into someone whose life skills rivaled a housewife's, practical, efficient, and unflappable. "We've a busy day," Severus said as he arranged their plans over breakfast. "After this, we'll go to Diagon Alley to buy a few things. At noon, we'll head to Hogwarts. Dumbledore invited us to lunch. All the professors staying at the school will be there, including Professor Slughorn, for a formal handover of some duties. This afternoon, we'll go to the Ministry's Auror office to cooperate with their inquiries and collect the remuneration owed to us. Robert and Lyle will join then, and we'll have dinner with them." "Hogwarts?" Harry's eyes lit up. "I made a friend with a ghost there. His name's Nick." "Good you didn't befriend Peeves," Severus said, blinking. "What's that?" "It's a kind of creature, also a ghost," Lupin explained to Harry. "But he's very mischievous and loves pranks." "There's another ghost professor at Hogwarts," Severus added, finishing his milk and dabbing his mouth with a handkerchief. "Professor Binns. He teaches history of magic. His lectures are unbelievably dull." Severus suddenly looked at Lupin and warned, "I remember you 4 had a habit of tattling." "I never did such a thing," Lupin protested, spreading his hands. "You didn't either, but your old scoundrel friends did. I'm only worried you'll pick up bad habits from them." Lupin sounded like an elder brother and felt a little helpless. Sometimes he thought Snape's change for the better was for the best. Other times he worried. He ate in silence. After breakfast, they took Harry through the Floo network to the Leaky Cauldron and into Diagon Alley. With the Daily Prophet already distributed that morning, the Crouch trial dominated wizard conversation, but Severus's reputation had also improved substantially. Saying something is one thing, doing it is quite another, and many in Diagon Alley wanted to buy him a drink. He declined politely until the 3 of them slipped away from the crowd into the market. Severus first led them to Slug Jigger's apothecary. The owner, Jiggers, clearly recognized Severus. 5 assortments of wolfsbane potion ingredients, please, and an extra 1.5 pints of dragon's blood, preferably Hungarian horntail. Hebridean black or Norwegian ridgeback quality will do if need be." The shopkeeper complied quickly. Those ingredients were expensive, but Severus's Gringotts vault held a considerable sum, comparable to nearly half the contents of a large vault. All of it had been earned by Ghost Snape over the years, brewing potions for others. After helping carry the parcels, Lupin, if not a master, at least knowledgeable, realized immediately what the materials were for. His expression clouded. Severus hadn't mentioned anything about Lupin's condition, yet on arriving in Diagon Alley he had gone straight to the apothecary and purchased the ingredients. Lupin's feelings were a tangle: gratitude, shame, and confusion. He'd been rough in his student days. How could he accept such costly help with a clear conscience now? Severus noticed his turmoil and said quietly, "Don't overthink it. I'm not as generous as you imagine. This was mostly Dumbledore's idea. I'm only following his instructions." That didn't erase Lupin's gratitude. Years of wandering had humbled him, and he understood what Severus's willingness to brew a wolfsbane potion without expecting anything in return meant. Still, he worried. With Severus changed so much, could Severus really be fair to James? The question lessened when Harry, having received pocket money from Severus, ran off shiny-eyed to buy ice cream. If nothing else, it would be for Harry's sake. "You take Harry and wander Diagon Alley for a bit. I need to go to Ollivander's," Severus said. Lupin didn't press. Wands were personal. He agreed to watch Harry, and Severus went into Ollivander's alone. Ghost Snape had reminded him the day before that he needed a new wand. Severus had not forgotten. Ollivander's was a cramped, narrow, old-fashioned shop. It should have been busy. August was the busiest month with new Hogwarts students, but today it was nearly empty. Only Mr. Ollivander himself was there. When the bell over the door chimed, the wandmaker paused on a ladder, then climbed down to greet Severus. "Professor Snape, what a surprise! I thought you were still at the ministry helping the Aurors. Is there trouble with your wand?" Severus produced the birch wand he'd had since his school days. Ollivander looked it over with the concentration of a man who remembered every wand he'd ever made. 13.5 inches birch, with a snake nerve core, an ingenious, mysterious, and noble combination. "You've kept it well. Even after more than a decade, it hasn't changed much from when you first left my shop." Severus inclined his head. "It served me well. I remember the first spell I cast with it, the first potion I brewed, vivid memories." But what?" Ollivander prompted, curious. Severus searched for the right word. Before he could land on it, Ollivander cut in. "It's not responding to you like it used to, is it?" "Something like that," Severus admitted. Ollivander didn't seem surprised. "My family, my work, has always followed the belief that the wand chooses the wizard. A wand will accompany its owner as they grow, but after certain events, it may not be as compatible as it once was. The wand in your hand is likely that kind. It cannot accept the change. It shows its incompatibility. But it also proves your repentance is deep and genuine." Severus met the old man's eyes, a faint, unreadable expression there. Ollivander's words were simple. The wand's disaffection was an acknowledgement of change, of a past that could not entirely be smoothed away, and of the truth that even a wand might judge the heart it serves. Thanks to CCPW for the Alliance Leader Reward. This ID is an old face. The extra chapters for the Alliance Leader will be added after this week's 10,000 daily words are completed. 5 chapters in total, which will be specifically marked in the chapter titles. Once again, I am deeply grateful, with nothing to repay. I shall pledge myself in the next life. Do not spend coins on this section. It's fewer than 200 characters. Next chapter, before midnight. In that case, let's try again. Ollivander was eager to continue. He led Severus down the narrow aisles of the shop and began rifling through the boxes. "Speaking of suitability, how about chestnut? It's a very versatile wood. It takes on different qualities depending on the core." He pulled out a box and opened it. 10 inches, chestnut, dragon heartstring, a very classic combination. He pressed the wand into Severus's hand. Severus gave it a small wave and cast Orchideus, but the wand did not respond comfortably. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It doesn't feel right." "True, chestnut with unicorn hair makes a very good match. The last 3 chief warlocks of the Wizengamot used that pairing. It might be too much of a change for you." Ollivander muttered as he continued searching. Soon he pulled out another box. "How about pear? Wands from that wood have considerable power, 11.3 inches, phoenix tail feather, suited for the generous and the warm-hearted and the wise." Severus took the wand, but before he could even move it, the tip exploded in a shower of sparks. "Good heavens, it doesn't like you. Forgive me. I forgot you have a specialization in the dark arts. This one is not fitted to dark wizards, not to certain kinds of people." He snatched the pear wand back and went on, offering Severus one wand after another to try. Finally, he drew a dusty box from a corner. "Here, try this one." He pressed the wand into Severus's hand with an expression that was hard to read. The moment Severus touched it, silver sparks leapt from the tip. He waved it and cast Avis. The wand felt like an extension of his arm. The motion was effortless. Spells cast with it felt noticeably different, smoother, as if his magic had always been meant to be performed this way. "This one is very good. It suits me perfectly," Severus said, satisfied. Ollivander's face, however, was not the delighted expression Severus expected. "Is there a problem with it?" "No, there's nothing wrong with it at all. 11 inches holly, with a tail feather from a phoenix named Fawkes, supple and flexible, precise and good for combat." Ollivander's eyes shone. "But it's peculiar. There is another wand that shares its core. In other words, this wand has a brother. Can you guess who bought its brother all those years ago?" Severus stared at the holly wand in his hand. Holly, a phoenix tail feather from Fawkes, and a twin core. This was the description of the wand Harry would, under normal circumstances, have bought before starting at Hogwarts. "Don't tell me its brother was bought by you-know-who years ago? You actually knew. Did he ever mention his wand to you?" Ollivander grabbed Severus's sleeve so hard it could have torn the professor's robes. It was plain he knew Severus had once followed that man. "I guessed," Severus said, expression unreadable. The revelation was unexpected, but he did not seem ruffled. "It's only a twin core. This wand is still perfectly functional, yes?" "Of course. Flawless. Wonderful," Ollivander reassured him. Severus considered something else. He fixed his gaze on the wandmaker and asked quietly, "If this wand suits me so well, would its brother also have a high affinity with me?" Ollivander hesitated. "There is almost no precedent. I've seldom made different wands with cores from the same magical creature. But theoretically, yes. And you, which the other wand is made of, has similar properties to holly. One tends to symbolize immortality, the other rebirth." "Holly symbolizes rebirth?" Severus looked down at the holly wand again, as if understanding why it had chosen him. "Yes. Holly wreaths at Christmas, signs of death and rebirth, and a phoenix feather only emphasizes that trait." Ollivander went on in a rush. "Then this is the one." Severus no longer hesitated. He produced galleons and bought the wand. Ollivander smiled as he took the money. "From birch to holly, from dragon heartstring to phoenix feather, the change in your wand is enough to show your own transformation, Professor Snape. I sincerely hope your repentance brings you a good future." "Thank you for your blessing," Severus said. "Farewell. Farewell." Severus left Ollivander's shop carrying the holly wand that in another timeline should have belonged to his future student. As for what Harry would use now, Severus had already thought that through when he learned the cores were twins. If both wands shared an affinity, he could, before school began, find the other wand, the U, hidden away somewhere by the now vanished Voldemort. If he could recover it, he would keep his former master's U wand and give the holly to Harry. No one would be harmed over a wand. Having bought his new wand, Severus rejoined Lupin and Harry, who were in high spirits at the magical menagerie, watching odd creatures. "There's a cat! It looks so ugly!" Harry pointed at a ginger, bandy-legged, flat-faced kitten. Lupin stroked his chin. "That cat might have Kneasel blood in it." Severus saw the same ginger kitten that would one day be named Crookshanks and absent-mindedly stroked his own chin. Then he turned to Harry. "You've gotten lost twice already. It's not good to keep getting lost whenever trouble comes." Harry looked innocent. "I don't mean to. It just happens. Perhaps I can prepare something for you." Severus checked the time. "It's still early. We can visit another alley. There are things you can't always find in Diagon Alley." He led them through Diagon Alley, deeper and deeper, until they turned down a darker lane that ran to a more infamous shopping street, Nocturne Alley. The place could not have been more different from Diagon Alley. Narrow, twisting lanes, leaning medieval buildings, and a persistent, eerie fog despite the morning light. Broken kerosene lamps sagged on either side of the street. "This isn't a good place," Lupin said, frowning as he pulled Harry closer. "That depends on who you're looking for," Severus replied. "I've earned a few galleons here. Some objects simply cannot be bought in Diagon Alley." Harry gripped a corner of Severus's robes with one hand and Lupin's sleeve with the other. They went on until they stopped before a shop whose painted sign read Borgin and Burke's. The window displayed withered human hands, blood-stained playing cards, and glass eyes that seemed to stare. Don't speak in there, Severus warned. Don't touch anything. He signaled Lupin to keep a close watch on Harry. The two nodded. Severus pushed the door open and stepped inside. Behind the counter, a stooped man with slicked-back, greasy hair looked up. He was oily in both appearance and manner. Aha! What an unexpected and distinguished guest! Seeing Severus, the shopkeeper stood and beamed. Professor Snape, you've been making quite a stir in the wizarding world lately. I thought I'd lost the chance to see you again. Severus ignored the theatrics. His relationship with Borgin was strictly transactional. When Borgin needed contraband, Severus sometimes brewed it for a fee, and when Snape needed illicit supplies, Borgin sometimes had what Diagon Alley did not. Borgin continued to smirk and tease. Cut the chatter. I remember you have a pocket watch here, right? Which one do you mean? The one made of hand bones? Borgin asked, raising an eyebrow. Not a cursed item, just a damaged alchemical pocket watch. You spoke to me about it months ago. You thought it might be the work of Nicholas Flamel, but it was badly broken, and most of its functions didn't work. A useless tracker, really. Borgin dug through a pile of oddities, bones and eyes clinking together, and produced an old silver pocket watch. Its case was plain and ancient. When he opened the lid, the face had no hands or numerals. Instead, silver runes were etched into a pitch-black surface. You must have misremembered, Borgin said, eyes darting. I never said it was worthless. This could be the work of Flamel, after all. It has potential, and it's more than a mere tracker. Severus ignored him. He slapped 20 galleons on the counter. I'll take it. If you won't sell, I'll get a tracking owl from Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Given our friendship, Borgin said, promptly sliding the watch across. 20 galleons is a steal. Any Flamel would fetch thousands. Borgin's hand moved so quickly the money was gone before Harry noticed. Severus pocketed the watch, and they left without lingering. On the walk out of Nocturne Alley, Severus took the watch out and tapped it with his wand. A small, silver, snake-shaped sigil appeared on the inner dial. He handed the watch to Harry. Keep this on you. If you get lost again, I'll be able to find you immediately. Harry grinned and fiddled with the watch before tucking it into his pocket. With their errands done, they did not dawdle in Diagon Alley. Dumbledore had invited them to a meal and was treating them. They could not be late or impolite. Around 10:30, the three of them returned to the Leaky Cauldron and used the Flu Network to travel first to Hogsmeade, and from there they set off for Hogwarts Castle.